This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Reaching back into the archives for summer, July 2023. 4 great voices, 4 timeless voices that you need to make your life better. I hope you enjoy. My guest today inspires readers. No doubt about that. He's the author of 17 books, including 5 bestsellers. His very first one, The Energy Bus. My guest, John Gordon. I can't think of any cooler way to break into the space that John has broken into and dominated than going down the sports direction. I'm not giving away any hints yet, but this is an inspiring story. Inspiring to see John overcome obstacles, to see John push and strive and make it happen. We can all hope like crazy to look at John's work and say, why not us? Why not me? Why not you? Now, before I get into my conversation with John today, one quick reminder. My newest book, Trend Following, How to Make a Fortune in Bull, Bear, and Black Swan Markets, is now available in audiobook. It only took about 2 months extra time. Don't ask why. These things happen. But it's out now. It's 34 plus hours. Give me a break. You can drive across the country listening to that baby. But enough of my book promotion. And on to my guest today. What a fun conversation. I sincerely hope you enjoy the perspective of John Gordon. So, John, listen, back in the day, I had a buddy of mine, and I don't know exactly how he did this, and I think it was for a Florida State-Miami game in Tallahassee. Somehow or another, this guy, knowing how the system worked, he found his way into the pregame speech that Bobby Bowden was giving to the Florida State Seminoles. He's sitting there with the team, the coaches, and Bobby Bowden, and eventually they just look at the guy and they, who the hell is this guy? Get this guy out of here. You, on the other hand, have figured out a more safe way to connect with the college football coaches of America. This is quite the interesting story. And I think where I'd like to really dig into here is partly how that's happened. But you've got such a fantastic client, I guess would be, with the head football coach of Clemson. What an interesting story. And I don't know what the interesting story is, but I know there's something there.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, I've been working with teams for years, even before Clemson. I say years, 4 or 5 years. I started, my first team was the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2007. Jack Del Rio was the head coach. He read Energy Bus. Mike Smith, who was the defensive coordinator at the time, gave him the book and said, you should have John come and speak. I didn't know Mike Smith, but I had a friend who knew Mike who gave Mike the book. Jack calls up. And I went down to meet with him, very intimidated.
This is a tough guy, right? I mean,
and a big, large mountain of a man. I had never spoken to a team before, a high school team, college team, and now here I am meeting with Jack Del Rio. I just wrote The Energy Bus, thought I had something that could make a difference, and now I'm sitting across from him, and he's telling me about how the book really impacted him, about the message of positivity and dealing with energy vampires and negative people and so forth. And he said, would you speak to the team? And I boldly said in that moment, I will speak to the team if you have everyone read the book. And he said, you got it. Done. I'll get it for everyone. He wound up getting the book for everyone in the organization, including the janitors, including the food service people. Everyone got a copy of The Energy Bus. And I went and spoke to the team. I was definitely nervous. I mean, at the time, Fred Taylor was on the team. Maurice Jones-Drew was like a rookie. I mean, these were guys who I loved watching play, guys I supported, saw on TV, and now here I am and speaking in front of them.
Completely random.
Yeah, just sharing my talk on, the energy bus. I don't think I was even a great speaker then. I definitely wasn't actually, but I was on fire. I got fired up and just started talking about staying positive, dealing with the negativity, don't allow the energy vampires to sabotage you and bring you down. It really resonated with it. And they had a great season. They went 11-5, made the playoffs for the Jaguars. That was a big deal, and beat the Steelers in the first round. Mike Smith then became the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. He then called me up out of the blue and said, "Hey, this is Mike Smith, coach of the Falcons. We just met briefly because I think we just shook hands and that was it." He said, "I want to do the same thing with the Falcons that you did with the Jaguars." And so I said, "Sure." So he got the book for everyone. Went to speak to the Falcons. Matt Ryan was a rookie that year, and Mike Smith was a rookie head coach. Spoke to the team, and then did that every year for 7 years while he was a coach until he got fired from the Falcons. But then I worked with the Texas Longhorns in 2009, the year they went to the national championship. Spoke to them because a coach had a friend on the team, had actually a friend who was an assistant coach. He heard about it, brought me in, then worked with University of Georgia. But then what happened is, coaches started to pass the book along. For some reason, it was a book that resonated with coaches. And then I wrote Training Camp with the best do better than everyone else, which is my favorite book I've written. It's about the winning habits that separate the best from the rest. So different coaches started reading those books, and then I started getting invited to speak to basketball teams, women's basketball teams, lacrosse teams, women lacrosse teams. And it's been crazy. I could have never anticipated that I would be doing this, but I do love it. I mean, I spoke to the Dodgers this year, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Miami Heat, and teams like that now. So it's really because it was just football. Now I'm getting to speak to a lot of NBA and Major League Baseball teams.
You know what's so awesome about it? Not just the content alone, it's the entrepreneurial instinct, smelling it out and getting that, taking that first chance and jumping in, not necessarily planning it at all and just going for it and each iteration that would come along and build on it. That's what's cool about that story.
You just nailed it because it was just showing up, doing the work, not worrying about failing, just giving everything I had, not knowing if it was going to be good or not, but then get invited back. And sometimes I'm surprised I am invited back, right? But just to do it and then get better and build. Now when I walk in with a team, I know what they need to hear. I know their challenges, and I can see how along this journey I've been prepared for these bigger audiences and so forth.
Okay, let's use a practical example and stay in the sports for right now because you do have this, and I hope I don't say it wrong. It's Dabo Swinney, right?
Dabo Swinney. Yeah, Dabo Swinney.
Okay, it looks like you want to say Swinney, but it's Swinney. He loses, his team loses the 2015 national championship 2 years ago. They win it this year. You were involved over the course of the loss and the win?
Yeah, I was brought there to speak 5 years ago. So I've been speaking to the team for the past 5 years. And what happened was Chad Morris read my book, Training Camp. I didn't even know Chad Morris, and he was at Tulsa at the time, hired by Dabo as the offensive coordinator for Clemson. He goes there, gives Dabo the book. This is how weird this stuff happens. Gives him the book. Dabo reads it, loves it. He starts sharing one of the 11 traits of what the best do better than everyone else. He's like, Clemson's going to be the best. And every week he shared one of those characteristics every week with the team for 11 weeks. He was sharing what the best do better. Now, I don't even know he's doing that, but every time I turn on the TV where I live in Florida, the Clemson games seem to be on the ACC network or whatever. I'm going through the channels, and there's Clemson. There's Clemson. I'm watching these guys going, I love these guys. I love this team. Next thing you know, at the end of the season, they had a good season that year. They won 10 games. The year before, they were 6-7, won 10 games. I get a private message on Twitter from Chad Morris, and he said, hey, would you ever come speak to the team? We used your book this year. I'm like, no way. I've been watching you guys all the time. I love your team. And I never loved Clemson before in my life. And so I went and spoke to the team 2012, and I've worked with the team ever since. So yes, I was there in the locker room when they lost the championship, and I saw Dabo give an incredible display of positive leadership because he didn't focus on the loss. He said, guys, I've never been more proud of you, of a group of men than I am tonight. You guys are amazing. I wouldn't want to coach any other team. You seniors, you've left a legacy. but you underclassmen get ready because we're coming back. And he proceeded to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes about how they were going to come back. They just lost the national championship, and he was already pointing towards the future. I was blown away.
I could very easily think, and you're going to have to educate me because I don't know the backstory, that perhaps you were able to give some piece of insight that helped after a big loss over the course of the next year, coming into where just recently in this, 5-6 months ago, where they actually won it. But now, if I go that direction, I can also very easily think that even the time they lost it, they could have won it, but not for a coin flip almost. I mean, it was literally the luck of the draw. I mean, and also when they won it, the game was so close. So you literally could have been reversed. They could have won the first one and lost the second one. But was there some growth there, or was there something you were able to do to help? Tell me your view on it.
Yeah, I take full credit for all their success. That's my view. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding, because I believe the complete opposite. It's funny because I spoke to Clemson, and then I also joke when I speak to audiences because I say, guys, not everyone I talk to wins. I spoke to the Cleveland Browns 2 years ago. So one thing I've learned about is it's never the talk. It's never the book. It's always the leadership. It's always the leaders on the team, the leadership in the coaching room, how they lead, how they deal with adversity, how they come together as a team. Dabo Swinney helped this team grow from that loss. He's an amazing positive leader. I think there's very few things that I said that made a difference. I know training camp, being a part of their program, was helpful. I know that teaching the coaches and team about loving, serving, and caring from the carpenter was very helpful. Dabo talked about that. He talked about his one word for the year. I did that with the team about having your one word and using that word to have more motivation and purpose. But Dabo had them do a vision board, each guy. They also had a lot of leaders after that loss that came back and said, you know what, we want to win another one. So they really had a lot of great leadership and team accountability. And then you have Deshaun Watson, who is the best quarterback in the country, the best gamer and a great winner, making that last drive. If he doesn't do that last drive, they don't win. So you're right. It could have been all these little things. So everyone looks at it after the fact, but it was a lot of combination of a lot of things. But the two biggest components, no doubt, were the vision that Dabo had, and the leadership and the belief in the players. And then the belief they had each other that, you know what, yes, they just scored with 2 minutes left, but we're coming down and we're winning this game. And they just had this incredible faith and belief in that moment.
Before I dig into some of the principles and ideals in your newest work, The Power of Positive Leadership, one more football type question, sports team type question. You've given some idea of the coaches and your connection with the coaches, but very often the coaches will know of you first, right? And they will then tell the team, hey, you got to know about this guy, John. I'm sure these are stud athletes. They're probably thinking, oh man, some of them are thinking this, hey, whatever. I want you, if you can, are there any names or any players, I don't care the sport, that you can think of when you walked in the room and perhaps they were a little skeptical and you gave one of those aha moments where they just paused, looked at you, and you knew you had won over a diehard skeptic? Does anything jump to your mind for any of the players in particular?
Well, I mean, I can't really talk about that from a personal standpoint. All I can say is that...
Describe a player without a name.
all I can say is that, when you speak to Oklahoma City Thunder and the Dodgers and the Miami Heat and the Padres and the Pirates, and you have Matt Ryan, the superstars, you have to win them over. Yeah, you're right. So regardless of who's in the room, and even if the coach endorses me, there's some credibility because the coach is saying, hey, I brought this guy here, so there's some value there. Chip Kelly even brought me to the Eagles, and Tim Tebow was there, and Mark Sanchez, and a couple guys were there. And Tim came over to me afterwards. I knew I wanted Tim over because he invited me to a Bible study afterwards. So that was pretty cool, and had a great talk with Tim after that. Really enjoyed our conversation. A great guy. So maybe that's something I can point to. But I do know that you have to win them over. You have to provide something of value that's going to make them better, that's going to help them grow. And if you can't, they're going to tune you out. And they're going to tell right away if you're full of it. And they're going to know if you're the real deal or not. So to me, again, I've had guys reach out to me after the fact, text me, have begun conversations. I'm there to encourage them and help them. And those are the kind of things that come from those talks. Not everyone. Some guys might be rolling their eyes. There are always going to be a few probably. But for probably 90% of the guys, buy in. There's maybe 25% that really buy in and they want to keep in touch with you. And that's something. And again, I don't charge these guys. It's just something that they'll reach out. I'll reach out, encourage them, and keep a dialogue. That's why, again, they're so private that I really can't share who, and I don't want to violate that trust.
Let's dig into positive leadership. Now, people might hear that phrase immediately, positive leadership. They might think to themselves, well, come on, all leaders are positive. I mean, but that's not the case. And I can think of an example, and I will try not to name names here, but there's a big ride-sharing company, and the CEO seems to get mixed up in every bad headline in the world, and it doesn't seem very positive to me. But for the audience right now, for those that are hearing of you for the first time, why don't you lay out for us positive leadership, big picture, macro?
Sure, and I'm glad we're moving into this because I don't just work with sports teams. I do work with a lot of companies and leaders of Fortune 500 companies. And it's funny because I actually do more of that than sports. Sports are just what people seem to love to talk about. But in terms of positive leadership, to be a leader, a real and effective leader, you must be a positive leader. We almost shouldn't have to say positive, right? Because you have to be optimistic if you are a leader. You have to believe in a brighter and better future because that's what leaders do. They point people towards the future. You could be a visionary. Steve Jobs maybe wasn't positive, so to speak, in terms of his relationships, but he was very positive about creating a future that he imagined, that he believed in, the culture, and also what they called his reality distortion field. That time and time again, he was able to distort the reality of his employees because they said there's no way they can create the software in a certain amount of time, and he would always convince them they can do it faster. And they said time and time again, he distorted their reality from, some would say, pessimism or realism, I'm just being a realist, to optimism. And that's what positive leaders do. So first and foremost, they're very big on vision. They see a brighter and better future. They lead with this optimism and belief that it's possible, right? We can do this. And then they also, though, deal with the negativity that exists. They don't allow negativity to sabotage their team. So that's something I wrote about, again, in this book and create a framework in terms of you got to address negativity. One of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is they don't address negativity. So being a positive leader is not about Pollyanna positive. It's not about thinking we're going to sing Kumbaya and hold hands all the time. So no, we got some real issues. We got some real challenges. We will address them. We will deal with the negativity, but we're going to do so in a positive way. And as we do so in a positive way, we then create a fertile environment now where we weed the negative, feed the positive, create an environment where everyone can do their best work. And then positive leaders do what they really do is they unite the organization. They unite people. They rally people. Alan Mulally, which I wrote about and that is a great example in the book. And then they also connect with individuals. They develop the relationship. So this guy you're talking about, the rideshare company, he's very big on vision, right? Excellent on getting a product to market, but I'm not sure I would describe him as a full-blown positive leader in terms of how he really approaches people and things, just as Steve Jobs maybe wasn't the complete positive leader.
Positivity, though, is contagious. And that might sound to some people hokey or something, but if you have a positive leader at the top who's pushing that positivity nonstop, 24/7, it does rewire the circuits of those underneath him, doesn't it?
It does. And you're right. It is contagious in a positive way. And the research shows this to be true that our feelings transmitted by the heart are contagious. So you're broadcasting positive energy or negative energy. We also have research that shows that emotions are contagious, emotional contagions. So people are likely to catch your good mood just as they might catch your bad mood. That's important to know as a leader, that you are contagious in that way. And so when you come in with this vision and your feelings and your emotions and your beliefs, those are contagious to the people around you. Leadership, I often say, is a transfer of belief. When Dabo Swinney got the job at Clemson, he walked in the office, walked in the team meeting room, and he brought in two signs. One that said believe and I can't with the T crossed out. And he built that program based on belief, saw firsthand how contagious it is. And people start to get the mission. They start to get the vision. They start to buy into the belief from that leader. And so you see it all the time in businesses. You see it in companies, in schools. You want to transform a school? Everyone's talking about transforming education. Bring in a positive leader as a principal, someone who can really rally the teachers, who gets them involved, gets them bought into what they're doing, get them involved in the mission of making a difference in kids' lives. You do that one school at a time, bring in a great leader, you're going to transform the school.
Let me use Dabo as an example here, just since you mentioned him again. It wasn't that he got the job and walked into the room and everyone automatically followed him. It wasn't because he mandated, you must follow me, I am the hired leader. This positive leadership is, it's the people underneath the leader want to follow. It's not just, you can't command it. You have to become that someone that, the people underneath you want to be like you. They want to be with you.
Yeah, I love the way you just said that, because it's not something you can dictate. The dictatorial leader no longer works today. You have to be someone that they want to follow. And you have to, as Walt Whitman said, convince by your presence. And so through your positive energy, through your belief, you're convincing. Now, let's get something straight here, by the way, though. People are probably thinking, does this mean I have to be an extrovert? No, you can be an introvert and still be a positive leader. Your energy is still contagious. The love that you have, the passion or the mission that you're driven by internally is what people sense, is what they feel. Your integrity is contagious. So ultimately, who you are is what people are picking up on every day and every moment. So that's what people need to know in terms of this leadership that truly makes a difference.
I liked this phrase that I had never heard before in the power of positive leadership, which is the caring trademark. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but you describe it as kind of that unique way to show that you care. What is that? What is that something? I care. I love doing this podcast. I'm at 500 plus episodes. I love writing books. I love doing these things. I don't know exactly what it is or what I put into it, but I think you can. If people stop paying attention, they know you don't care. I think if you do give it your all, but I was trying to think of that. I was like, wow, a caring trademark. That's really an interesting concept. Speak to it. And you're how that came to you, and perhaps an example that you could help illustrate with the audience.
Yeah, I started to think about, like, every great leader and company does have a caring trademark. If you go to Publix supermarkets, have you ever been to a Publix?
Down in the South, I have.
Okay, and if you ask someone who works there where something is, they're not allowed to just tell you. They have to walk you to the spot on the shelf and show you where it is. They're not allowed to say, aisle 9, good luck, man. They have to take you to the spot. So that's their Karen trademark. They're known for that. Les Schwab Tire Centers in Oregon, when you pull up, they actually sprint outside from inside to greet you when you get out of your car at the tire centers. That's their Karen trademark. I started to think of Chick-fil-A, which says my pleasure, not no problem. They say my pleasure. That's one of their Karen trademarks. And so people have them as well. Dabo, for instance, he believes in his players more than they believe in themselves. Clint Hurdle, the coach of the Pirates, the manager of the Pirates, he's just a guy who just loves his players like family. And they just know it. Some coaches like Mike Smith, he's a great listener. Like, that's his Karen trademark. He truly listens, and his players know that he's always there for them with a listening ear. My Karen trademark is encouragement. I love to encourage people. And so I know that anyone who reaches out to me, for instance, needs encouragement, I always respond because I want to encourage people. So that's my Karen trademark. Derek Jeter with the Yankees, his last at bat was so special. It was a game-winning hit, right, in Yankee Stadium. But it was so special because he ran to first base every time, whether it was an out or a home run, like it was his last at-bat. Every at-bat he treated like his last. So he showed he cared. Doug Conan, former CEO of Campbell Soup, he has written over 10,000 thank you notes to people he's done business with and to his employees of Campbell Soup at the time. So that was his Karen trademark, is to write these thank you notes. Amazing. If you don't know what it is, I really believe you can discover it And I believe that your podcast obviously is one of the ways that you show you care. But here's the thing. We could tell when someone cares or not, right? We know when they care. They put their heart and soul and spirit and passion into it. I wrote about this in The Carpenter. There's a difference between a carpenter and a craftsman. Carpenter shows up and just builds something. But the craftsman or the craftswoman, they put their heart and soul and spirit and passion into what they're building. Why? Because they care more.
Now, look, anyone listening to you right now can feel the energy. They can feel the passion. And, of course, to go in and deal with corporate America and sports teams, you have to give that too. But I think, and I'm not mistaken here, I don't think I'm mistaken, I've seen you described, maybe this was a self-description, a 31-year-old, fearful, negative, stressed out guy. Is that accurate?
That was then, yeah. Now I'm 46, so that was a while ago.
So what was going on at 31? What was I mean, obviously you're not there now, but it can be helpful for people to see. I mean, you describe yourself fearful, negative, stressed out at age 31. What changed for you?
What changed was that my wife gave me the ultimatum, like, okay, change or you're off the bus. She really said, if you don't change, I'm leaving. So you better change. And I begged her to stay, agreed to change, and that began my journey.
How did you take the first step?
The first step was literally a prayer. And I never really prayed before like this. I just said, God, like I reached out and cried out, like, why am I here? I know some people don't believe in God, but I was like, you know what? God, I know you're out there. I am miserable. I'm negative. Why am I here? I know I'm here for a reason. What is it? And I kid you not, writing and speaking came to me in that moment. It was a divine experience. I mean, it wasn't like a lightning strike or anything, but it was just like this came to me and I'm like, okay. And I had this feel like that's what I'm going to do.
That aha moment.
Yeah, like what am I going to write about? I don't know, but I'm going to do it. That's what I'm going to do. Ken Blanchard was one of my role models I looked up to. He went to Cornell and taught at Cornell. I went to Cornell. It's funny that he would wind up writing the foreword to The Energy Bus, my first book. I said, okay, I'm gonna write and speak. I didn't know what, but I have a friend to this day. He's the CEO of a company, very successful. He remembers me telling him like one day, like around that time, like, I'm going to write and speak. That's what I'm going to do. And he's like, and you went and did it. And it was just literally, it wasn't success right away, but I just said, that's what I'm going to do. And I began the step, though, of more so changing me more than trying to change the world. It started with me having to become a more positive person. That's why that chapter is called From Negative to Positive, because I had to get out there and become a better me first. So I was like taking walks of gratitude and prayer each day, just saying what I was thankful for, trying to flood my brain and body with positive emotions that uplift me. I started writing different things and, sharing these tips. At the time, there wasn't newsletters back then. There weren't all these blogs. In 2002, I started a positive tip of the week. I've done it now for 15 years. I write it every week myself, and I still do it every day. Again, got to care, right? Got to care more. Got to continue to do it.
Doing the laundry, so to speak.
Yeah, I still do the laundry, but I didn't do it then, but I do it now. I got to show my wife I care, and so I continue to do these like newsletters every week because that's what I did back then, and I got to continue to show that I do it. But it was like this step by step of doing the newsletter, just starting out there, sending it to 5 people, then 6 people. I then started to say, hey, I'm going to write and speak. I started putting it out there to friends, anyone who wants to talk. I created a web page that just was like a picture, had a news section, and it was just like, this is what I'm doing now. And a friend reached out, said, hey, I have a friend that works for Singular Wireless. This is how long it was. Would you go speak to her team? I did like 80 free talks, 80 free talks just to get started. But it really helped me get better and improve as I did it. And again, I never thought I was going to make money from this. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go do this and live this life that I'm meant to live and go do what I'm meant to do. And if it makes me successful over time, if it's leads to great things, then great. If not, we'll see what happens, but I'm just going to go for it.
Look, when you can find an insight that other people don't know and pass it along, that feeling alone gives an adrenaline burst that you can't turn off.
Yeah, as a speaker, you know this well, right? When you've made a difference in someone's life, and you write as well, so as you write and speak and you can impact someone, that is the greatest feeling in the world. People always ask, what's the greatest feeling? It's not winning the lottery. I believe it's knowing that you made a difference.
Yeah. Hey, there's a couple bullet point notes that I made here, and I don't know if you've talked to any kind of Wall Street folks yet or have gone that direction, but there's two phrases, and they're not necessarily connected, but embrace failure and trust the process. You might be surprised to know that in great trading, great Wall Street performance, embracing failure, like for example, if a trade goes against you, getting out, taking a loss is like number one, and trusting the process, meaning once you have a system or an approach, you have to stick with it regardless of the minor hiccups along the way, the quote whipsaws. So I don't know if you've thought about this, but I see some of the statements in your book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I kind of have written about this in a completely different audience, but embrace failure, trust the process. Give me your feeling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the same kind of principles for success in sports, on the trading floor, investments. You have to trust the process. You have to say, you know what? These are my strengths. These are my principles for success. You cannot lead or succeed based on circumstance, right? You have to lead and succeed based on your principles. This is how we do things. This is how I handle, because those principles are your rock when circumstances change. Now, it doesn't mean you're not flexible. It's sometimes different circumstances you have to be flexible, but you lead by your principles and your process of how you do things. You know, so the principle side of things is what you're talking about. And then what was the other one? The process and
embracing failure.
Oh, embracing failure. Yeah. So embracing failure is the key to any success. Now, you don't want to have, too many failures. You want to learn from your failures, but it's the idea of a growth mindset that along the way, failure is an event. It's not a definition. You cannot be afraid to fail and succeed at the same time. It's an NBA player going for a shot. If you're worried about missing it, you're going to miss it. You got to be willing to go for it, and to truly succeed in trading and investments, you have to be willing, right, to take some risk. It's mitigated risk, but you have to take some risk in order to succeed.
I want to go into a topic, something that you brought up early in the podcast, and some people might not be familiar with the term. They might be able to deduce pretty quickly where you're going, but energy vampire. Give the definition of the energy vampire from the John Gordon perspective.
Well, it's that guy in the locker room, or that teacher in the building, or that person on the trading floor, that person who works in your office that just sucks the life right out of you. They're just a negative person. They're an energy drain. When you finish a conversation with them, you feel exhausted. That is an energy vampire. And one person can't make a team, but one person can break a team. I was speaking to the University of Georgia football team. Mark Richt brought me in to speak. And after I spoke, they lost the first two games. I thought I ruined them. He had the entire team read the energy bus. And then after they lost those two games, I was like, oh, man. So I sent him a text. I said, Coach, I still believe in you guys. He said, John, the guys are still on the bus. In years past, we've allowed energy vampires to sabotage our team, but not this year. This year, we will not allow it. In their big meeting room, they put a huge picture of an energy vampire on the wall. And anytime one of the players was being a vampire, they took their picture from the media guy and they put it on the wall. No one wanted to be on the wall. They went on to win the next 10 games in a row, making it to the SEC championship. That team truly believes that staying positive really helped them. And a team that stays positive together wins together. And guys were going into his office saying, Coach, I'm not going to be a vampire anymore. I've been one, but I'm not going to be one anymore. And you know what? I go to companies. I've worked with some financial companies. You were mentioning that earlier. I have. And you can see the guys. They just roll in their eyes. They think whatever. They don't need this positivity. You know what? They're not into it. And there's always going to be a few vampires. But I believe to create a great culture, you have to address those vampires. To create a great culture, you can't allow one negative person to sabotage your culture or your team, because if they're bringing everyone else down, that's going to affect performance overall. You see football coaches do it. You see great teams do it. So I'm a big believer in making sure that you address those vampires, try to transform them, try to help them get better, help them improve. If they don't, you got to let them off the bus.
That was going to be my question, really, was the practical effect of dealing with an energy vampire. There's the attempt to transform, but is there a way where the audience, from all the experience you've seen, is there something where people, when you've got an energy vampire and they won't transform, is each situation's different, but are there telltale signs that you've got one that's not going to transform, and the only solution is to part ways?
I think it's going through the process of trying to work with that person, talk to them, coach them, and see if they're willing to change, see if there's a change of heart, see if they're humble enough to say, you know what, I want to get better. And if they're not, because I mean, there were guys who are now in the NFL who were on that team at Georgia who literally were transformed by deciding to be positive. And they talk about how it changed their life forever. I know 3 or 4 of them that I still have great relationships with. So if someone's not willing to change, though, Butch Jones came to me at University of Tennessee. He said, John, he spoke to 10 of them, his vampires. 8 stayed on the bus and 2 got off. And he knew that those 2 had to get off. They were unwilling to change. So I believe you go through the process of trying to make a change, trying to impact. If they won't change, then right then and there, you know you got to let them off. So cool, though. We work with this. We have an Energy Bus for Schools program. We are transforming education through this building positive cultures and positive leaders. Started out with 5 model schools. Now we have 50. We're going on 100. It's unbelievable. The case studies are going to be incredible what's coming out of this. But we had one principal call us, and I have a former principal, and she runs the whole thing, Nikki Spears. And she said, Nikki, she's like, I don't know what to do with this vampire. Should I kick them off the bus? And Nikki said, just work through it, try to transform it, and build your culture so strong that they'll get off themselves. She goes, I don't know if that will ever happen. Well, guess what? The end of the year is happening now. That teacher came to that principal and said, I just can't do this energy bus stuff anymore. I'm resigning. I can't do it anymore. I can't stand it. She couldn't stand the positivity. So she was out and she got off herself.
You know what I love too? This one line here that I jotted down. Don't be negative about negativity, which kind of treats it like an isolated cancer. This is my wording, but don't be negative about the negativity, meaning you can spot it, you can attempt to deal with it, but don't let it affect you. Just let it be something compartmentalized. Am I reading you right?
I had to write that in The Power of Positive Leadership because it's been 10 years since the Energy Bus has been out. Many people are discovering it for the first time, but the people that have used it, over the years, some have misused it. So what they do is they say, you're either on my bus or off my bus, and that's their leadership. And it was never meant to be that way. So I have people literally emailing me saying, John, we're reading your book. My boss, that was the biggest energy vampire of all, and they're trying to promote this like it's part of the plan, part of the program. It's really hard to get those kind of emails because that was never intended to be like that. So I wrote this to say, you know what? You may have negativity, but you don't address it in a negative way. You don't be negative in that way. You have to, through great leadership, through relationships, what we talked about earlier, belief and vision and being positively contagious. Get those people on your bus by the way you lead. If they don't, then you let them off. But don't come in with this negativity thinking it's positive.
One last one for you, John. I think it's a really important one for any personal success, any team success. There's been some books written about it, but I would love for your perspective as well. And that's grit, persistence, grit. I mean, it's like the starting point. You've got to have it. You've got to believe. You just got to stick with it no matter what.
Yeah, Angela Duckworth, foremost researcher on grit, just wrote a great book called Grit, came out. We had a conversation before her book was coming out, and I told her my thoughts on grit, asked her, were they in alignment with her research. She said yes. So I knew I was on the right track. And the key here is that, as she says, grit is the number one predictor and factor of success. And every leader to succeed, as we know, will have to have grit because you're going to face adversity. You'll face challenges, the energy vampires, the naysayers. Steve Jobs was fired. Oprah was told she wasn't good enough. Elon Musk went through all the challenges, right, that he had to go through to build his companies. Everyone who has this leadership opportunity will overcome challenges on their journey. So it's the grit that continues to push you forward to be successful in the long run.
John, why is this perspective that you have, why is this not thrown out to freshmen in high school, freshmen in college? Why do we go these other directions that sometimes seem to be more of the pretend world and the real world is kept away from students? It's a long answer, I know, but I hear you and I'm just like, gosh, this should be indoctrination. This is like 101.
I appreciate it. That's my hope. I mean, in writing this book, it's only been out for maybe a month now. So I believe that I wrote this book. My mission and passion in writing this book was that it's going to be the standard of what positive leadership is about. Not Pollyanna. grounded in reality, based on research, and with hope and vision, optimism, and practical, right? Practical ways to lead, that this will be what we will teach high school kids, college kids in business schools. That's why I combine real business examples, real coaches, real examples, a framework that we can use, create an action plan to go with it. And now I'm working on an assessment that a leader could actually take to see where they stand, and then a 360 assessment where a leader will give to their team and say, how am I doing? Am I really a positive leader like I think I am? Because we get all these leaders that think they're positive and they're not. And I also want a team to be able to say to their leader, hey, can we do this assessment with you? And see if the leader will be okay with that. So I want to transform leadership and get all those horrible leaders that are really destroying cultures, ruining their teams, leading the wrong way. I want to transform those people to be more positive leaders, because if they can lead better, we will have much better people, much better offices, much better buildings, companies, and really, I believe it will change the world in the long run.
John, you're infectious. Good stuff. The new book, The Power of Positive Leadership: How and Why Positive Leaders Transform Teams and Organizations and Change the World. John Gordon. John, I appreciate you taking some time today. Great insights. Sounds like a really fun life you've developed. I'm quite envious. I love the sports connection. Awesome.
Thanks, Mike. No, I've had a blast, and it's been a lot of fun, a lot of grit, and a lot of adversity, and a lot of pain along the way. But I am enjoying it now.
Where's the best website we can send people to, John?
It's johngordon.com, JON Gordon.com, and Twitter at JONGordon11.
John, I appreciate your time today.
Mike, thanks so much. You're awesome. I really appreciate it.
My guest today is Rob Arnott. He's an American entrepreneur, investor, editor, and writer who focuses on articles about quantitative investing. He also serves as chairman and chief executive officer of Research Affiliates, LLC, which advises on over $160 billion in institutional investment assets. Rob has also served as a visiting professor of finance at the UCLA Anderson School of Management, on the editorial board of the Journal of Portfolio Management, and advised the product advisory board of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board Options Exchange. I aim to have wide diversity on this show. Now, of course, as a guy involved in trading books, that's where I start. Now, anyone who listens knows that I'm willing to go in a multitude of directions on this show. But what I like is clean thinking, clear thinking, reasoned thinking. And that always brings me back to trading, to investments. I'm very fortunate today to have one of the world's preeminent voices on good investment strategy on this show. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rob Arnott. You've got this great title that the average person still kind of thinks, what does that mean? A quant. Now a quant in the investing world, a quant in the finance world. But take me back in time. I mean, I've seen you say that this is the direction you wanted to go as a young man. Really, you had a couple of directions I've seen you said you wanted to go. But take me back in time to a young man. Who were you at 16, 17, 18? What were you thinking at that point in time? Obviously, you were going down the academic path. You were getting all the right grades you needed, unlike some of us. Give me an idea of what you were like as the young guy. What were you thinking?
Well, when I was 16, I was just finishing up high school, was very mathematically inclined, avid interest in the stock market and the stars. So I was trying to decide, do I want to go into astrophysics or do I want to go into investing? I think the decision was made for me by the realization that my mathematical skills were good enough to do top-tier work in finance and not good enough to do top-tier work in astrophysics. I chose the finance path fairly quickly, was writing articles that were getting published in Journal of Portfolio Management and Financial Analyst Journal. I remember meeting Peter Bernstein when I was in my mid-20s, and he was in his mid-50s. And he said, "Gosh, I didn't realize how young you were." And I said, "Gosh, I didn't realize how old you were."
What a great early mentor, though. My gosh, huh?
He was awesome. He became one of my dearest friends. When he died, I wasn't surprised, but I was shattered. I just thought it was terrible. Such a fantastic human being. I mean, there's a lot of people who accomplish wonderful things in their field. He's a Jewish guy, and in Judaism, the word mensch comes to mind. Somebody who's genuinely kind and caring human being. And that was him.
I still remember, I think it was in the 1990s, my first exposure would have been his Remarkable Story of Risk book. And that was one of those eye-openers for me to get me thinking about risk in math terms. And he was all those great stories he had, just fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, who could imagine writing a book called Against the Gods, which was, in effect, a history book about the history of risk and a history of our understanding of risk as it related to investment markets, and having it be a bestseller. I mean, if somebody told you, "I'm going to write a book about the history of risk in capital markets," do you think it'll sell well?
At that time, it wasn't like today where a really prominent person could say on social media, "You must read this book." It takes off, perhaps like a Taleb book or something. It was earlier than that. So there was less of that social media push.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And actually he and I wrote, I think, 3 articles together. And the work that I did with him was, I think, the most lucid articles I ever was involved in writing. And it's because he wouldn't tolerate a lack of lucidity in the writing. It had to be absolutely accessible to the reader. If somebody with high school education wanted to read it, they should be able to read it.
That says something about when you start talking about risk, though, too. If risk measures get too complex, too complicated, they might not serve you very well either. So that clear, lucid thinking all the way down to trying to explain, you make the point.
Well, this is one of the failings of the quant community. I think the quant community has a lot of issues. Some of them relate to an addiction to complexity, and some of it relates to a willingness to obfuscate. So if you make your ideas complex enough that people can't understand it, then that creates a seductive attraction to some. But, people shouldn't buy something that they can't understand. If you've got too many moving parts, it's easier for something to break. And it's harder to know why it broke. It's harder to fix it when it does break. I like the fact that the strategies and products that we develop tend to be fairly simple. The old notion of keep it as simple as possible without losing effectiveness, or make it only as complex as necessary. Occam's razor.
Take the simplest route. If you got 2, one's complicated, one's simple, they give you the same result, go for the simple version.
Right, exactly. I mean, think back on tactical asset allocation. Generation 1 TAA simply looked at the earnings yield on stocks and the yield on treasury bonds, compared the two. And if it was 1 standard deviation higher than normal for the stocks, you buy stocks. If it was 1 standard deviation lower than normal, you tilted towards bonds. That worked brilliantly for about 20 years. then the relationship started to break down as stocks lofted to kind of a new normal. The normal valuation since 1990 has been different from the normal valuation before the 90s. For a long time, that simple approach worked beautifully. The same thing applies to our own work on fundamental index. Fundamental index simply says, instead of weighting a company by its popularity, by its market capitalization, why don't we weight the company by how big it is, what its economic footprint is in the macroeconomy? Well, how do you measure the size of a business? You can use the size of its business by sales. What's the percentage of the macroeconomy that ExxonMobil represents, measured by sales, or measured by profits, or measured by book value, or measured by dividends, or you could use other measures like number of employees. And it turns out it doesn't matter which measure you use, any of these measures adds about 1.5% to 2% a year going back 50, 60 years. More recently, we've taken the analysis back to the 1920s, and you still get 1.5% to 2% a year, going all the way back to the 20s.
Versus just the pure market cap. I took you off on a tangent here, but I want to be like a Quentin Tarantino film for a second and kind of jump time frames. I want to keep you back before we dive into current day and dive into a lot of your current work and where you've gone. Take me back, though, for a moment. When you're at that time at meeting Peter, give me the age. When you're walking out of college, 20, 22 years old. What year are we speaking of right at that point in time?
I got out of college in 77. I took my time getting through college. I was 23 when I got out of college. Started work immediately for the Boston Company, which owned Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Bank. It was an institutional asset management company also. And it was a member of the Q Group, which I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a newly formed group that had only started, I think, in 1974, and this was 1977. And I met Peter Bernstein, I think, in 1979, so I would have been 25, at the Q Group.
What's really interesting about that time is I think to some of the other traders, fund managers that I've met in my lifetime so far, and different styles, and we can talk about that in further in the call. But that time period, the late 70s, unique in the sense, this is, and maybe even to the early 70s some, but this is a time where if you were involved in finance, you could now get your hands on coding. You could now test things. You could dig in more than you could in other generations.
Exactly. So that was the notion of being a quant was impossible in the 1950s, in the early 60s. It was unimaginably expensive in the late 60s. It was only in the 70s that it became even possible to contemplate using quantitative methods. So I was a quant before the term quant was coined. I think the term quant was probably coined right about 1979 or 80, and I was a quant right from the get-go in 1977.
Were you knowing about the Apple products like almost immediately?
I was a late adopter of Apple products. Apple, keep in mind, Apple was designing products to be beautiful, simple, and accessible to the everyman. It didn't seek out the geek crowd. The geek crowd wasn't necessarily going to be drawn to something extremely simple.
I was thinking even earlier, I guess, when they first would have launched, because, there could not have been any more of a geek than Wozniak. Of course, once Jobs started, I randomly met him 2 years ago in Saigon, Vietnam airport. Is that not crazy? Steve Wozniak.
That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah,
no, the Apple One was, if I was still involved in systems programming, which is programming at the bit level, I might have found the Apple One to be just fascinating. But that's how I paid my way through college, was systems programming.
Speak to that for a moment. Let's talk about that, because you start to look at markets. You have the ability to test ideas. Today, somebody can go and they can connect up with a trade station or something and buy these beautiful off-the-shelf products. Now, all those bells and whistles would have not been necessarily, you would not have been thinking about those or not even needed those to test and explore early on. Speak to the audience and some of your early testing, because it's a very solo process. I mean, right now, everybody can look at the headlines and all that kind of stuff. But when this started, this was you testing in your mind, your ideas. There wasn't a big crowd or anything. This was a very solo venture.
No, there weren't a lot of us. These days, the quant community is crowded with a lot of people who are very, very smart, very well educated, a lot of physics PhDs, that kind of thing. When I hire these hard sciences PhDs, I tend to view them as a missile that's going to go 20,000 miles an hour in some direction. And it's my job to make sure we point them in a useful direction, because they're going to go 20,000 miles an hour some direction. But to them, the numbers are just numbers and the signals are just signals. They'll mine the data however much we allow them to mine the data. The risk of data mining becomes quite severe. Back in the early days, I was doing just basically simple Fortran programming and writing programs to search through databases and assemble simple models to backtest simple ideas. For instance, if you filter stocks on price to book value, rank them based on their Z-scores. For price to book value, what's 1 point in Z-score worth in terms of return year by year and on average over time? Do the same thing with price to earnings, price to sales, and so forth. Fairly early on, found that price to sales, which was not very popular, hardly anyone looked at it, was actually more powerful than the others. So early days of my career did fairly well just by relying on a valuation metric that wasn't widely used. Found other things that were pretty powerful, volume measures, that rising volume suggested rising interest in a stock and was bullish, falling volume was bearish. Very common sense stuff, but always using scientific method, which meant don't mine the data and then try and come up with the explanation afterwards, the rationalization for why it might work the way you discover it works. Start with a premise and then test the premise. And then don't tweak the model endlessly to try to extract the best possible fit, because that best possible fit is probably not going to work nearly as well in the future as it worked in the past. If you try to improve your model historically, you may not be improving it on a forward-looking basis at all. Right from the beginning, I was very wary about data mining long before I had ever heard the words data mining.
There must have been an aha moment at some point in time. Because look, we've got this, and I've seen you say, one of your heroes, Jack Bogle of Vanguard, and, he puts in motion this indexing process that so many people adopt. But you had an aha moment at some point in time. I assume probably you were alone. This is something where you said, my gosh, this is going to be something. I want to go down this path. Maybe you didn't know how big it was going to be, but I want to go down this path. I want to go down the path of putting indexes together, not based on market cap. Even though you could look out there and see all the success at Vanguard. I mean, that's fairly daunting to say to yourself, wow, okay, these guys are killing it. I've got a new idea, a new mousetrap. How did that happen?
I've never worried about other people killing it with their products, because their products started out small and started out as a fledgling idea. I mean, I know Jack Bogle's history well. I think of him as a friend with whom I disagree strenuously on a couple of topics, one of which is fundamental index. but I have huge admiration for him, and I think of him very fondly. But when he started, the IPO for the index trust was generally viewed as an utter failure. The expectation was they were going to raise $100 to $150 million, and I think they raised $11 million. And the brokers who were involved in raising the funds at the IPO wanted to just kill it. He courageously said, absolutely not. We have the world's first index fund. So we're going to start with $11 million. So we don't even have enough to buy all 500 stocks. We'll buy as many as we can. We'll see how it goes. But he was confident that it was a good idea and worth pursuing. I've always felt that if you have an idea that you think is a good idea, give it a try. Be very patient. Be willing to stand behind it for several years. Don't throw in the towel for several years. Be willing to do the missionary work to get people interested in the idea. Sometimes the ideas take off pretty fast, like fundamental index and tactical asset allocation. Sometimes they take off really quite slow. You mustn't be troubled by the fact that others with other ideas have been massively successful and already seem to own the space that you're trying to enter. New ideas always start out with nothing. They always do.
Yeah, there'd be no Jeff Bezos, right? I mean, if he was daunted by that.
Yeah, I mean, if he was afraid of, stores have all the sales, bookstores sell all the books. How can I possibly start a business that sells books without having a store? No, he was a glass half full guy who said, nobody's doing this. Why shouldn't I sell books across the internet and have people just connect with me on the internet, say, I want this book, and we'll figure out ways to make it efficient, sell it for less than the bookstores. As he said in a recent interview, your pricing power, your ability to control the price of your product is my future entree to your business.
As authors, I don't think any of us really want to comment on Amazon, but let's just say they have all the power.
Oh, they sure do. They sure do. And when it comes to, if you're writing a novel and they're squeezing your margins, that's troublesome. If you're in our business, chances are you have various sources of income, and the book royalties are only a part of your total income. At least I hope it's only part of your total income.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there would not be much income if that was that. Hey, let me take you to the idea when you're looking at Vanguard, their successful launch, but you start to say to yourself, hey, hold on, how is the S&P weighted? Speak to this thinking that you're having where this weighting, look, if Amazon ends up being 10% of the S&P, they're getting weighted that much. In hindsight, all these things seem simple and straightforward, but you had to be thinking in a different way to kind of say, wow, okay, let's reimagine this.
Ever since the S&P 500 was launched, there have been critics saying, wait a minute, the more expensive a stock is, the bigger the weight it gets in your portfolio. That doesn't make sense at all. And when they started running money based on the S&P, my goodness, the investment managers came out of the woodworks and mounted frontal assaults saying, firstly, if the valuation doubles, your weight doubles, so you own twice as much just because the stock's twice as expensive. That makes no sense at all. That's stupid. And frankly, I would agree with that. That's stupid. These same managers were having trouble beating the index. Interesting. There are lots of problems with indexes, and one massive advantage of indexes, and that's that they cost less. Two massive advantages. They cost less and they'll beat most active managers. And you can prove that they'll beat most active managers quite simply because the index funds track the market, which is cap weighted. If you take the index funds out of the market, what's left is the active managers. And guess what? Collectively, they own the same portfolio. So collectively, they have to have the same results, minus trading costs, minus fees, which is going to mean that collectively they perform worse. Now, it's not quite that simple because the indexes don't cover the entire stock market. There are investors who aren't professional money managers. The professional money managers aren't holding quite the same as the index, but it's pretty close to the same thing.
A key word you just said there, though, was collectively, because as I've seen you say, look, you can beat the market. It's the collectively issue. It's in play.
That's exactly right. And that's where their standard argument, active managers can't beat us because of this. Well, that's not true. An active manager can win if there's some loser on the other side of the trade. Now, that loser on the other side of the trade can be another active manager, or can be one of the legions of performance-chasing individual investors, or can be an individual investor who's firing an active manager or redeeming a mutual fund just after it had a lousy 3-year run and everything in the portfolio is dirt cheap, and it's a wonderful time to buy that fund instead of liquidating it. Well, those investors are legion. So if you have a strategy that takes the other side of those trades, it's likely to work. Cool. Now, the other thing that's interesting, and by the way, I am a fan of indexing. I think indexing is the go-to strategy, the strategy you should use unless you think you've found a better idea. Relative to most active managers, it's a preferred option, especially for taxable investors, because mindless turnover, careless turnover creates tax obligations that you will pay. You'll have a negative tax alpha on your portfolio from sloppy active management. But the index funds systematically buy high and sell low. There's a few ways you can prove this. One, stocks that are added to the index generally are trading 1.5 to 2 times the market multiple. Stocks that are dropped from the index, if it's not a corporate action, a merger, an acquisition, if it's a discretionary deletion where the stock just is eliminated from the index by the S&P committee or by the Russell formula, chances are it's a really out of favor company that's trading really cheap. So what we find is the stocks that are added on average are trading 3 times the multiple of the stocks that are dropped. 3 times the multiple. How do they perform? In the first year after they're added, the stocks that are added generally underperform by an average of 600 to 1,000 basis points, 6 to 10 percentage points. That's big. The stocks that are deleted from the index generally outperform by 8 to 1,100 basis points. That's a spread of nearly 2,000 basis points.
That's real data.
That's real data. You want to beat the index? Why don't you run an index fund where whenever the index is changed, you jot down a note on your calendar 1 year from now, and you make the change a year late. You will beat the index by that 2,000 basis points times the turnover. The turnover is about 2 to 3%. So that gives you 40 to 60 basis point advantage. That's not bad.
And I think the key there, as you describe that, that's just one example, but it's the thinking. It's the thought process, the system process, the digging in and saying, let's reimagine this. And for example, as we were already kind of going in that direction, the idea of not looking at an index only based on market caps, and you kind of say, hey, let's look at these other factors. There's other factors we can look at. Speak to that, and also speak to the, kind of bring people into your world of thinking about these other factors. And if we start to put an index together based on other factors, how do we measure those factors, then how do we rebalance those factors? Speak to that issue. This really starts to get to the heart of your world.
Well, the idea of fundamental index had actually been in my mind going back to the mid-90s. I'd just never done anything with it. One of my dear friends in the business, a guy named George Kane, who was the founding president of the Common Fund. They manage commingled university endowments for universities with endowments that are too small to hire a big staff of their own. When he was running the Common Fund, they had a brilliant record of running a commingled trust for equities, for bonds, and so forth. It disturbed him tremendously to watch universities buy index funds, big state pension funds buy index funds, and to watch during the tech bubble as companies like Intel and Microsoft and so forth ran up to astronomical weights in the portfolio as the tech bubble was cresting. He came to me in 2001 and said, I sit on a couple of state pension boards. Notably, he sat on the New York board, which had 40% of its money indexed. And he said, I watched this happen. I watched the tech sector rise to 32% of the index and then crash. And because it became so expensive, it became a huge part of their portfolio, so that a huge part of their portfolio crashed. There's got to be a better way to do this. And I immediately thought back to my old idea of weighting the portfolio, not proportional to the popularity of a stock, not proportional to its price or its market cap, but proportional to the size of its business. So that instead of mirroring the look and composition of the market, you'd be mirroring the look and composition of the macroeconomy. Think of it as an economy-weighted index. I had long thought that a sales-weighted or a book value-weighted index would be interesting and would probably beat the market by some margin. I was just starting Research Affiliates at the time. I asked my newly minted PhD research guy, Jason Su, to track down the data to do a back test, and we were able to test it back to 1974, I think, so about 30 years of data. To our astonishment, it beat the market by 2.5% a year. I was expecting a few dozen basis points, not hundreds.
That's using your internally developed factors outside of market cap.
Right. Don't think of it as factors, because the factor tilt world is different. This isn't really a factor tilt. It's weighting a company according to the size of the business. It's not
the economic business, where it fits into the broad economy.
Correct. Now it has factor tilts. That is to say, it always has a value tilt. It sometimes has a size tilt and so forth. But it's not like the factor tilt strategies that are becoming very popular these days. It's very different from that. It completely severs the link between the price of a stock and its weight in the portfolio. And that's the beauty of it. That's why it works, because it no longer systematically and automatically overweights the overvalued companies and underweights the undervalued, which is the Achilles heel of cap weighting. So one of the aha moments was when we tested all sorts of different weighting schemes, and they all added about the same value. And I wondered, what's going on here? They're all roughly the same. The one that's not is cap weight, which is 2% behind any of them. And I suddenly realized, it doesn't work because of the fundamentals. It works because it breaks the link with price. And so we tested minimum variance, we tested equal weight, a variety of other strategies that also break the link with price. And they also added about 2%. So no matter what you do, if you break the link with price, you're going to add 1.5% to 2% a year. We partnered with Nomura to make it available in Japan. They had deep databases, which we didn't at the time. We do now, of course. They tested it all over the world, and they found that it worked in 23 out of 24 countries around the world. Going back 30 years, we were now able to take it back 40 years in the US, and it worked on average about the same all over the world. Country by country, it varied, but the average was 2 to 2.5% outside the US. Well, that's pretty cool.
As a quant guy, and you're digging in at this stage of development of the firm, and you speak to the issue right there, you say, okay, breaking the link with price. Well, that gives the audience a perspective, an investment perspective. Your style, your thinking is more value-based, clearly. Speak to, though, breaking the link with price, because that kind of hints at like, hey, let's steer clear of the momentum or the trend chasing strategies. But a guy like you that's testing everything under the sun, you're seeing some viability in those strategies. Or give me some perspective at this point in time, because this is one of these great yin and yangs, or this is how I would see it. You might see it completely differently, but you do always see, you got value on one side, you got momentum on the other side. This is something that still is confusing for people.
Well, momentum's very popular. There's a lot of momentum strategies out there, both formal momentum strategies that deliberately seek momentum, and accidental momentum strategies when people just buy something because it's gone up and they're enthusiastic about it. I think there's way more money managed with accidental momentum than with deliberate momentum, because who wants to buy something that's gone way down? It goes against human nature. Anything that's given us joy and profit, we want more of. Anything that's given us pain and losses, it's get me out of here. And that's deeply ingrained in human nature. Momentum has been tested endlessly. The first major study of momentum in stocks was by two professors, Jagadish and Titman, that was published in 1993. What's interesting to me is momentum worked as a strategy beautifully as far back as you can get data until 1999. Then, when the tech bubble burst, you had your first momentum crash. The stocks with the terrific momentum, the tech stocks crashed. You crashed and burned with a momentum strategy then. You had another worse momentum crash in 2009, and some smaller momentum crashes, both between those two big ones and one smaller one after 2009. The result is that standard momentum, if you go back to 1999 and you were running a standard momentum strategy from 1999 to date, and if you were able to trade for free, you would have made no money.
Let me let you add something there, though, too, because just so we can keep the audience going with this thinking. When you're speaking of momentum, there's probably more than the two types that I'm about to say, but we can think of, at least for me, I'm thinking, okay, you got time series over here, you got cross-sectional over here. Then there's also the idea of what type of portfolio are you trading? So why don't you clarify a little there on your thinking?
Standard momentum is basically favoring the stocks that have the best performance over the last year. Technically, standard momentum excludes the most recent month. So it's trailing 1 year, excluding the latest month, and then avoiding the stocks with the worst performance over the last year, excluding the latest month. So that's standard momentum. There are at least hundreds of ways to define momentum. They all rhyme. They all behave somewhat similarly. The fact that standard momentum had its first peak in 1999, another peak in 2002, another peak in 2007, and then after the 2009 crash, you've been struggling your way back since then, and you still, to this day, are below the 1999 peak. That means for 18 years, you haven't made money with momentum. That's the dirty secret of the momentum business. So it works most of the time, but when it crashes so hard that you better not be using it when it crashes. So that is the big problem with momentum.
As you say that, Rob, what type of markets are you thinking of? You strictly in the equity world as you're saying that?
This is mostly the equity world. To a lesser extent, it happens elsewhere. You can see it in the commodities world. To a much lesser extent, you can see it in currencies and bonds, but mostly it's the equity world. So momentum is, you better know what you're doing in momentum if you're going to use it. But the premise behind your question, the yin and yang, momentum buys what's performed well, value buys what's performed badly. So they are complementary. When momentum is working, you really want momentum and value as a pair of strategies. The combination is powerful. When momentum is not working, you better not be using it. Value also goes through cycles. Value, just as one example, value peaked in 2007, and it's had a horrible decade. Growth has beat value by 350 basis points per year compounded for the last 10 years. Oh my goodness. That's almost as bad as value's performance at the peak of the tech bubble in February of 2000. It's unbelievably bad. Does that mean value has changed and is permanently impaired and should be avoided? Or does it mean that value is now trading at bargain basement prices and is a bargain that deserves to get all of our investment dollars? I think it's a bargain in the U.S., but I think it's a screaming bargain outside the U.S., especially in emerging markets. So the short answer to that question is watch the valuation. Some of these strategies are trading rich and should be avoided. Some of these strategies are trading cheap and deserve outsized attention. So one of the things that we've been investing a lot of our time and research on is how to gauge when strategies are likely to work and when they're not likely to work. And it turns out relative valuation is a very powerful tool, even for momentum. Whenever momentum is saying, as it is right now, chase the bubbly tech stocks, chase whatever is unbelievably hot, that's when you're better off saying, no thank you, I better not use momentum right now. Because that's when you're likely to have a momentum crash.
Let me take it back here also to the idea of when you start to assemble your first fundamental indexes, because you're kind of hinting at this in the last few minutes, which is how does one know that something has become expensive or is not expensive? So for example, you say, hey, let's move away from market cap as one of the weightings. Let's go to these other weightings that we start to develop. Okay, once you go to those weightings though, the world's not static. It's, things change. Speak to how you decide those weighting changes because, when something's more expensive or not expensive. And I'm also be curious, I'm assuming this is something that is automated. This is not necessarily not discretionary. This is all systematic.
It absolutely is. Back in February, we launched a website called Smart Beta Interactive. If you Google Smart Beta Interactive and scroll past the ads of those who piggyback on our website, but with paid promotions, the first thing that pops up that's not an ad is our website, which is an interactive website for looking at smart beta strategies and factors. And what that website does is it poses a very simple question. Yes, it will help answer the question, how has this strategy or factor performed in the past? But much more important than that, it asks the question, how can this strategy perform in the future? How is it likely to perform in the future? And it bases that analysis on how expensive is the strategy today relative to its own historical norms. Value is always cheap by definition. That's the definition of value. It's stocks that are trading cheap. But sometimes value stocks are trading at a little discount to the market, and sometimes they're trading at a big discount to the market. When value is trading at a big discount to the market, you don't want to just load up on value. You want to take a deep value tilt in your portfolio. You want to look for the deepest value managers you can find. That's when you want to load up on LSV's products, for instance. If value is trading rich relative to history, then maybe you don't want to pay that much attention to the value strategies that are out there. When we invented fundamental index back in '04, we did not think to look at relative valuation. So fundamental index worked very nicely in '05 and '06 and early '07, and we were pleased. And we noticed that fundamental index was making smaller and smaller and smaller bets. So our tracking error relative to the market was getting tighter and tighter. We were looking more and more like the market. Well, fundamental index takes the growth stocks down from their market weight to their economic weight, and the value stocks up from their depressed market weight to their larger economic weight. When the market's paying a skinny premium for growth, the shift in our weight for growth, we downweight the growth stocks only a little bit and upweight the value stocks only a little bit. We have a small value tilt. When the market's paying a huge premium for growth, we take on a huge value tilt. What was happening, and we didn't even fully understand it at the time.
This is coming into 2007.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that our bet on value was getting smaller and smaller. So when the quant crash happened in August of 2007, there were some strategies that lost literally thousands of basis points of performance in 3 days in August of 2007. That's why it's called the quant crash. Our strategy underperformed by 1% in those 3 days. Now, we thought 1% underperformance in 3 days. Oh my goodness, that's a big drop. But it wasn't compared to what was happening to most of the quant community, which was getting savage. If we had done this work on relative valuation at the time, we would have seen value's expensive. Avoid value. Small cap is expensive. Avoid small cap. Momentum is expensive. Avoid momentum. What did the quant community have? It had long, short strategies loading up on value, small cap, and momentum, and then leveraging those positions. And if you're taking all three of those bets and then leveraging them, no wonder you can lose 40% in 3 days. In effect, this work would at that time have suggested some pretty dire risk and would have suggested even fundamental index had a little too much value exposure, as skinny as our value exposure was. And even fundamental index was likely to get whacked a little bit. It's interesting work because it even helps us understand when our own strategies are likely to be disappointing.
Obviously, it's a very competitive landscape, but there's interesting debates and different viewpoints out there. And I think one of the viewpoints, and I would love for you to kind of address it, is that some folks will say, hey, trying to time these factors can be very difficult, and we think that's just not really doable. Whereas we think we should be more in a diversification mindset versus a timing mindset. Speak to this debate, because this is something, look, we can all hit the Google and we can see this rather high-end, complicated conversation from very smart people. For the investing public out there, it could get a little deep, can it?
The simple fact is everybody's timing factors. We're all timing factors. Every time we make a decision to adopt a new strategy, we're timing a factor. If you embrace a strategy that's a multi-factor, equally weighted strategy, you're timing factors because you're moving from one strategy, maybe it's a value strategy, into that multi-factor strategy. Well, that's a big move away from value. You've just made a timing bet that value is going to do badly. When you choose the factors that go into the multi-factor strategy, right now, low volatility strategies are trading rich relative to history, just like value was 10 years ago. Value has had a horrible 10 years. What if low vol has a horrible 10 years? Are these multi-factor strategies going to drop their low vol component? I bet they will. And if they drop their low vol component, are they going to be guilty of factor timing? Of course they are. I think the mere fact of which factors are chosen for the multi-factor is itself a factor timing choice. My first point is everybody does factor timing whether they realize it or not. If they say, we believe in diversification, we're not going to do factor timing, sorry, but in the design of your product, you just did factor timing in designing the product. Second thing is pretty much everyone I talk to, including the advocates of multi-factor static weights, agrees that if a strategy is trading in the top decile of historical valuations, you're not going to go far wrong to say, why don't I chop the weight on that factor in half? And if you take a strategy that's trading in the bottom decile of historical valuations, really cheap, why don't you say, let me boost my allocation on that factor by 50%. At AQR, they call that sinning a little. If that's okay to do that, then all we're really arguing about is how much sinning a little is, what threshold of sinning is okay and what threshold of sinning isn't okay. So I would say everybody does factor timing. The only question is, how much factor timing do you want to do in your investments? And what do you want to base that factor timing on? Do you want to base it on, hey, what's performed best in the past? That's what most people do. Or do you want to base it on, hey, what's trading cheapest now relative to its own historical norms? What strategy is priced today to be likely to perform better than in the past? I'd sure rather do the latter than to follow the lemmings by doing the former.
Very clear perspective. I want to shift you to something, though, that you mentioned earlier. You used the word tactical earlier in our conversation. And I would love to throw a name out there for you. He's one of my favorite guests on this podcast, one of my favorite people. I've met him, I think, at least twice, I believe. Harry Markowitz.
Oh, he's one of my favorite people, too. Another guy who I would cheerfully attach the word mensch to.
I mean, one of the nicest guys ever. I mean, really.
He turns 90 in exactly 1 month from today.
I got to get him back on the show then for sure. I talked, it was 2 or 3 years ago when I had him on this show, and it was so great. And I interviewed him in person before. I called him up for the podcast, and he answers the phone, and it's like, this is Harry Markowitz. How are you? You're just like, hold on. How old are you, Harry? It's like, he's like the youngest 90-year-old guy ever, huh?
He is. He's a breath of fresh air in his optimism, in his cheeriness, in his enthusiasm, in his curiosity. And the curiosity extends way beyond investments and the mathematics of finance. I mean, he wrote a paper about how he thinks ants find food in a house. All right.
If he gets back to his early career, he was kind of always a bit of an outsider. He was not like, he kind of did this paper, and I think most of the people in Chicago were like, hold on, where did this come from? Obviously they knew who he was, but still he was kind of an outsider.
Well, it was 1952, which, doing the math, means that he was 24 years old when he wrote it. So he was a young pup. I'm guessing a lot of the professors looking at this thought, this is pretty interesting, pretty powerful stuff, or pretty intelligent stuff, but how are you going to use it? Little did they know that it was going to shape an industry. He and I joke from time to time about, gosh, Harry, you should have gotten a patent. You should be collecting royalties. And he laughs. He would be 10 times richer than Bill Gates if he.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Let's speak to his because we start to talk about tactical as I start to think about Harry, and the basic way of thinking has always been, okay, you first we started with, hey, here's your all stock portfolio, then you added bonds, you start to look at correlations, you see, hey, we can get a little extra return, we can drop the risk a little, but speak to this idea of tactical now. It goes beyond stocks and bonds. Why don't you, because you just hinted it. Not hinted, but you mentioned the worldwide opportunities. But speak to the idea of tactical right now.
Yeah, we're actually doing a paper right now, should come out in a few months, challenging the notion of benchmarks. The working title is Hobbled by Benchmarks. When we create a benchmark for our portfolio, we automatically anchor to it and are drawn towards it. And so if 60-40 is your benchmark, you're going to hold a portfolio that looks an awful lot like 60-40. You just will. You're going to miss out on a whole lot of diversification opportunities. The diversifiers have the effect of, one, allowing you to reduce risk, while two, allowing you to pursue diversifying risk premia and thereby earning a higher return. Well, that's cool. There's also an excess return associated with diversification in and of itself. If you take stocks and you earn 10% on them, and you take bonds and you earn 10% on them, a 50-50 portfolio won't earn 10%, it'll earn more than 10% because there's a premium picked up as a consequence of diversification. Well, that premium goes up almost linearly with the number of diversifiers you use in the portfolio. So if you have 10 diversifying asset classes, all lightly correlated, you get almost 10 times the advantage that you get with having one. That's really cool. When we assign ourselves a benchmark that's heavily anchored on just two asset classes, one core asset class and one for diversification, we hobble ourselves and reduce our opportunity set. It's fun when you think about the opportunity to add value with broader diversification. The opportunity is huge, especially right now. Why especially right now? Because U.S. bonds are priced to give you 0.5% real. Yield is 2.5%. Inflation expectations are 2%. The difference is 0.5%. That's your real return. And stocks are priced to give you about 0.5% real. That sounds unbelievably bleak, but the arithmetic is compelling. The yield is 2%. Over the last 100 years, earnings and dividends have grown 1% faster than inflation, actually 1.25%. If growth in the future is as fast as it was over the last remarkable century, then 1.25% real growth in earnings and dividends plus 2% from yield gives you 3.25% real return. That's not bad, but that's what you'll earn if the Shiller PE ratio is still 31 times earnings, which it is right now, still 31 times earnings 10 years from now.
To add to your thinking here on the diversifiers, adding in the non-correlated diversifiers, in my world, that I've done some work on the managed futures side of things, the time series momentum. Now it's not value, it's not stocks only, it's diversified over a lot of different asset classes. But as a math guy, I know you appreciate when you can take that stream and generally add it in to the typical stock and bond portfolio and get some risk reduction, get some enhanced return. Why do you think after all these decades, and maybe you're going to correct me and say, Mike, I disagree, but why do you think after all these decades, we still don't see something like that style of momentum being used more by advisors? Why is there seemingly a discounting, or I don't want to touch that hot potato?
I think there's two reasons for it. One, people see and are spooked by the momentum crashes. And two, the benefits of diversification are modest and are earned over long periods of time. The issue of career risk comes into play. We talk about these portfolios having a time horizon that is long. Typical pension has a 50 to 75-year tail on it of benefits that are going to be paid out decades in the future. But the people responsible for overseeing the pension, board members, have an average time on the investment committee of about 3 years. Executives involved in overseeing a pension have an average time in their position of 5 to 6 years. That means the whole focus is, I don't want horrible things to happen on my watch. Secondary goal, I'd like to do as well as I can on my watch, subject to no catastrophes.
You are right there in the catbird seat of seeing how modern finance, modern investing works. And for you to say that, if people are truly grasping what you just said, it's kind of sad about our current investing climate, at least for some of those that are the caretakers of great size and assets. It's not the most fun thing to hear someone who knows how things work say that.
There's two ways to look at it. Again, glass half full, glass half empty. Your ordinary retail investor usually has a time horizon a lot shorter than that and is a ferocious performance chaser. Hear about an investment at a cocktail party, invest in it the next day. A year later, it's been really disappointing, bail out, and almost never think in a contrarian fashion, gee, this has gone down. I wonder, is it cheap enough to buy more? Or, gee, this has doubled. I wonder if I should take my winnings and take my chips off the table. No, the thinking is the opposite. This thing has soared. I want more of that. Or this thing has soared and I haven't been invested in it. I better get in. This other thing is a turkey that's lost me money. Get me out of here. That's the retail thinking. And so the institutional investor who is deeply concerned about career risk doesn't want blow-ups, but that in turn means that they're still going to have a steady hand at the tiller. Yeah, they're going to anchor on benchmark. And yeah, the benchmark right now is priced to give them a horrible rate of return, but it's still going to be better than the retail investor. I think from a glass half full perspective, there's a lot to be said for professional asset managers from that perspective. Financial advisors. I have a very provocative view on financial advisors. I think financial advisors do their clients a fantastic service if they add no value whatsoever. Why do I say that? Because it's so easy for their clients to add hundreds of basis points of negative value add, to piss away large swaths of their wealth with really dumb decisions. And if the financial advisor merely serves as a steadying hand to make sure the client doesn't bail out at the bottom of a bear market, doesn't chase the top of a bull market, and maintains a steady course, the measured value added of the financial advisor will be zero. The value add relative to what would have happened without the financial advisor's assistance will be hundreds of basis points per annum.
One of the best ways to make money, not lose money.
Exactly. And we're in a business where you win by making fewer errors.
Rob, you've been very kind to me today. You went over time. I've got 4 pages of notes here. I could keep asking notes. You mentioned performance chasing. I would love to speak to you about that, maybe at a future call, and actually get some of your views on some of the behavioral work that's so common in finance these days. But listen, I really appreciate your time today. Great stuff. I think people are really going to enjoy this. We didn't even get a chance to talk about Liberty, which is, I know, a big, near and dear thought to you as well. The best place for people to go check you out, Research Affiliates. There are papers across the internet. There are articles people can dig in for a lot more information. Anything else place you want to send people beyond the company website?
Our interactive tools for asset allocation and for looking at smart beta are well worth a look. They've both gone viral. The asset allocation interactive and smart beta interactive, if you Google just those words, asset allocation interactive or smart beta interactive, and click the first link that says Research Affiliates, it'll take you straight to those websites. The goal of both websites is to help wean people off of the temptation to put more money into whatever has performed well in the past, and to help people have the courage to put money into what's cheap and priced to offer better future performance. If we can help people do that, both websites are free. The asset allocation one has had upwards of 1 million unique hits since we launched it almost 4 years ago. And the smart beta ones had 300,000 hits in the 7 months since we launched that. So these have gone viral. They're well worth a look. I would encourage folks to take a look, see what you think, and you might find them to be useful tools in thinking about how you invest.
Rob, once again, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been fun.
My first big picture question that I think perhaps is even the most important question that I can possibly ask today, which is, did you start deadlifting because of Nassim, or were you doing it on your own in advance?
Not in advance. It was coterminous. What happened was we actually hadn't been in touch for a little while after the publication of Anti-Fragile. Not because we'd fallen out or anything like that, just, schedules, agendas, the whole thing. I remember actually I read the IYI, Intellectual Yet Idiots, piece in Medium, which I just thought was hilarious, brilliant, and, insane at the same time, in a good way. At the end of it says, and they don't deadlift. And I went, well, I do, and I have been doing since, I've been deadlifting, I'm 50 now. I've been deadlifting since I was 42. So I've been doing this for a long time.
I used to do heavy squats for a long time. I'm more of a crazy yoga maniac these days, but I appreciate the deadlifting. There's no getting around what that is. It's hard, it's work. That's just the bottom line.
It's one of those things when you get to 40 as an academic, there's a fork in the road. And you can look around the university and you can see the people that haven't actually done anything after the age of 40. And they don't look good. And then you see the people that really made an effort and really went out and did deadlifting or biking or whatever it is. And, that's the ones you go, that's who I want to be when I'm 60. I don't want to be the other guy.
I think you've got only 1 year on me, so I feel like I'm the same way. I'm going to fight Father Time like crazy. There's no sitting around becoming, that guy you just described. No way. I want to jump into something that I think will be interesting. You're one of the people that publicly was stating that you saw the Trump victory coming. I want you to get into the detail of it, though, your perspective and why. I have a feeling it's a touch more detailed than my perspective. Mine was quite simple. I can't say that I made the prediction. I'm not going to say that. But on my Facebook, I started writing about it and sensing it early on. And I have to say, just at a basic level, it was really that question when he responded with the Rosie O'Donnell remark. I was like, wow, okay, I followed American politics for 30 years. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I've never seen a politician answer a question like that. It was like game on. I'll let you expand there, but you've got a wider take as to why you saw Trump coming. And it also connects back to Brexit as well.
So I'm a political economist. And what does that mean? It means that To a certain extent, I care about agents, people who do stuff. And I care about how they think about the world, because the world is insanely complex. And none of us has direct access to the world as it really is. We all, in a sense, act on stories on one level or another. These can be economic stories, like trickle-down works, which it doesn't. These can be social stories, right? But, that's how humans work. We work with these kind of little stories in our heads. The story that we've been telling ourselves since about 1980 was the world needs to integrate, globalize, privatize, liberalize, and we'll all get rich. Well, if you're a political economist, you spend any time studying the data that we have, we know that we're not all getting rich. A tiny fraction of the world is getting rich. And even the much pumped globalization story that the whole world's gotten richer is only partially true. The best numbers we have show that the bottom 50% of the entire world got 12% of the growth from 1980 until today. But the top 1% globally made off with 27% of it. Now, let's take this into a local story. We know that the link between wages and productivity broke down in 1973, that 60% of Americans haven't had a pay rise in real terms since 1980. How did we fill in the gap? We filled in the gap with the liberalization of finance. We went from having public deficits backed by the states to having basically private deficits backed by nothing, but increasingly precarious employment. For huge numbers of Americans, things have not been good. Then there was a giant collapse of the financial system, which bailed out the people who had assets and then stuck the cost of that bailout on those who didn't. And then we still have wage stagnation despite the recovery that's been going on for years. Now, along comes Trump. And Trump basically does one thing that the Democrats refused to do. He admitted that there was a problem. He basically said things aren't right. Whether it's talking to steel workers, whether it's the genius move he made one time when he walked into an area probably where the Democrats never went, I think it was Oklahoma or something, and said it's great to talk to the other 1%, by which he meant the military. For all of the talk of the Democrats about identity politics, Trump is brilliant at the politics of recognition. He recognizes the fact that these people really feel that all of the benefits have gone to a small elite on the coast, and they're left with crumbling schools, crappy infrastructure, and ever more insecure jobs. And they're one sort of paycheck away from bankruptcy if any of them gets ill. And the Democrats were singularly unable not just to talk about this, but to recognize it in any way. Now, when you put this in the context that so-called anti-system parties have been on the rise in Europe from even before the financial crisis, that these strains are common across the OECD, even if they're exemplified by the United States and the United Kingdom, and then you look at Brexit, you begin to think this isn't some kind of weird thing where this guy called Trump comes along. If Trump hadn't come along, we would have had to invent him, because the system has shifted. Essentially, we're in a world whereby the system that we built since 1980 should have collapsed in 2008. But we kept it going with massive central bank intervention, liquidity support, trillions of dollars in asset purchases, just to make sure that those who have assets remain whole. And the cost of that has been continuing stagnation and continuing lack of wage growth for the vast majority of people. Now, at some point, people are not stupid, and they kind of put the dots together themselves, and they go, well, if things are doing so well, how come nobody I know is doing well? And I just began to hear that more and more and more. And I thought, Trump's going to get into this. Now, had it been a more, let's say, credible Democratic candidate rather than Senator Clinton, the result might have been closer and it might have gone the other way. The combination of a tone-deaf candidate who has no ability to either emote empathy or articulate a clear and coherent vision as to where she wants to take the country, alongside someone who basically says, you know what, for you 60% out there, I'm for you, she's for her. That's a very powerful set of things. So basically, I think it was by about June or July, I think it was June 16, I gave a talk here at Watson called Global Trumpism, and I think I said at that point, I'd give him 60% on. And people gasped, and I said, no, this is all of a pace. This is all part of, let's say, a global moment for Trumpism in general that goes far beyond Trump.
For people that have a sense of a political pulse, you could just feel this was dramatically different. This was something that we had not seen before.
And this is why the Democrats, I think, are in for a shock in November, because they're just basically playing this game that Trump is this illegal person who's done terrible things, and the Russia investigation will unmount him and uncover stuff. And all of that might be true, right? Let's not dismiss Mueller or any of that sort of stuff. But in a sense, it doesn't matter, because you can get rid of him. The establishment Republicans have no resonance at all. We saw this in the primaries. And you're going to have yet another version of this kind of strongman populist popping up on the right, because that's what we see everywhere. Look at Europe. That's the entire landscape has been transformed in this same way, because people have lost faith in the left, because the left parties are essentially the handmaidens to this neoliberal globalization. They shorted their own core constituents in order to grab the middle, and the middle proved fleeting at best. So you look at the SPD in Germany, one of the dominant parties of German politics since 1945, it's down to below 20% of the vote. The only left party in Europe that's growing is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. But if you read the British press, you'd never know anything about that, because they're united in his condemnation of him, his party, and his reported anti-Semitism. So the left is either disgraced, failed, or under siege, and the right is ascendant.
Let me throw a big picture one at you in terms of the desire to get elected. I think, in my observation in the last 30 years, there used to be more candidates that seemed to be tied to something they really believed in, and they were going to pursue this, whether on the left or the right. But today, it seems like almost transparently, all political leaders, and I'm saying primarily from America, but I'm curious if you would see it the other way across the world, but leaders seem to be just thumbing their nose at everyone and saying, you know what? We're just giving you a bunch of bullshit. We just want to get elected. We just want the power. We literally want the power reins. We don't care if we accomplish anything. We don't care if we do anything. We just want the power reins. It's like the worst of the worst leading us.
Yeah, so the Germans have a great word for a moment like this, which is Jein, which means yes and no simultaneously. So I'll give you a quote that sounds just like this. Jean-Claude Juncker, who's one of the head guys at the European Commission, says that in 2011, we know what needs to be done. We just don't know how to get re-elected once we do it. Right, so you can take that as emblematic.
Is that the guy that's always drinking and grabbing the ladies' butts and stuff?
No, he's the one that I think, if I remember correctly, used to run Luxembourg as a giant tax dodge, and now he wants multinationals to pay taxes. So the hypocrisy runs deep. Let's put this in a broader context, right? Back in the 2000s, I wrote a couple of papers, academic papers, about what I called cartel parties. So what's a cartel? So imagine the following, because this, again, I'll give you a structural story rather than a greedy individual bastard story, right? So imagine that your left-wing parties are centre-left parties, and it's the Thatcher-Reagan moment. And those right-wing parties have said, unemployment is your problem. Markets will be liberalised. We're going after trade unions, right? The whole agenda. And the left-wing parties go, oh, that's terrible, don't do that. But basically, people's incomes are rising for the first time in 10 years. The inflation of the 70s is dissipating. A whole new generation of people are beginning to form assets, houses, stocks, shares, and they start to lose, and they lose systematically. So over a period of 10 years, they go, you know what? Unemployment's your problem. Markets are good. In fact, markets are awesome. We love bankers, right? So this is the Tony Blair, Gerhard Schroeder moment. Now, when you do that, what you're doing is you're actually offering your constituents less and less policy choice. It's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And when you have Tweedledum and Tweedledee, what happens is you get people on the outside, on the fringes of the left and the right going, this is just a cartel. This is bullshit. They're not actually offering you any choice at all. And they start to pop up in the fringes. If you think about the EU, what's happened there is you've had these cartel parties that have constitutionalized this cartel through the whole arrangements to do with the European Union, to do with how the size of your budget deficit and how you do policy and all this sort of stuff. And that has left populations, think the Italians, feeling that they have no effective choice. What happens across Europe in the financial crisis is the incumbents lose power. You vote in whoever the opposition is. They do exactly the same. You vote them out. And the third time round, this is when you get Salvini, this is when you get Cinque Stelle, this is when you get the populists, particularly on the right, taking over. Because as I said before, populations ain't stupid. They know that if you're going to give them 10 years of Tweedledum and Tweedledee, you're still driving around in your Mercedes, worrying about what private school you're going to send your kid to, and you're worrying if your kid's going to have a school to go to. Then eventually you stop listening to these people.
Let's put some numbers on this. I always look at things in the frame, since a lot of my world has been about trading and traders. And I can think back over the last 25 years observing assets under management with particular hedge funds or particular hedge fund managers that had made a lot of money. George Soros has led the pack for a long time. But now, in the last 5 to 10 years, this has changed so dramatically, and the wealth concentration, the bonuses, the amount of money, the disparity between, let's say, just quote, Wall Street across the world and the populism out there, the population out there, that has gotten so wide. That chasm is so intense. Why don't you put some numbers to that?
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact number, but I do remember the magnitude. In 2015, Wall Street bonuses were twice the size of the entire wage bill of everybody in the United States on minimum wage. That's a good one. Right, right there. You could take the Oxfam estimates that basically there are 5 people in this world that own as much as the bottom 30% of the entire global population, which is just insane. Again, order of magnitude, it may be 6 people. I don't remember exactly. I mean, we can go through the statistics in terms of Gini coefficients, measures of inequality, all that sort of stuff. But what really matters on the ground is that, do people feel that this is okay? You can have pretty unequal societies so long as people feel there's a legitimate chance that they or their kids will have a chance to move up the ladder. And if you have that, you can sustain pretty high levels of inequality. But at the same time, if you feel that it's increasingly an insider game, if you feel that all the advantages are going to a particular class and they're hoarding them, and if that's the case, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are. It's this felt sense that the system is rigged. And again, to go back to Trump, right, he may have done nothing about it, but that was one of his main messages. The system's rigged. You guys are working harder than ever. You're getting less and less, and I'm going to change that. Well, he didn't change it. He reinforced it. But nonetheless, that was the message that he got onto.
I would love for your comment on this. One of the most amazing things that I've seen in America in the last 25 years is surrounding the Washington, D.C. area. So I own property there, 15 miles outside of D.C. Everything has become a McMansion. And what's interesting is in the early 1990s, it would have been perhaps in Northern Virginia, 70% Republican. That's entirely shifted to 70% Democrat. I'm not really trying to make a left or right point right there. I'm just kind of laying out what's happened. The amount of wealth that is concentrated in the D.C. area, if the regular American population really understood what's going on in the D.C. area with federal jobs and the largesse that's spinning off from that, I think you would have a pitchfork moment. But it's kind of not understood, that wealth concentration by most of America, at least yet.
But remember, you've got to break that out a little bit, right? It's not as if people who work for the DMV have been getting 30% a year pay rises. What happens is the vast majority of government workers have seen stagnant wages like everybody else, if not declining real wages. What's happened is you have privatized essential government functions to the extent that if you go to the ballpark in D.C., the road that's at the side of the ballpark that's got Kellogg, Brown, Root, all these consultancy companies that basically live off privatized functions from the Pentagon and just charge hundreds of millions of dollars for things that we used to do ourselves inside the government. And then there's the lobbyist community that says, let's sell off even more, let's have more of this, and then they're all taking their cut. This is essentially the rape of the state. That's where that wealth has been generated, by privatizing public goods. It's not the growth of federal jobs, far from it. It's the privatization of federal assets.
For decades now, we've all kind of poked fun about how Russia was carved up after the fall of the USSR. You just make the point right there, and I think it's a fair point. Much of America is being carved up in the same way, just not as openly, perhaps.
Well, not just that. You have a much wealthier country to carve up. If you start with Russia when it's lost 40% of GDP, privatize the remaining assets, people notice because there's nothing left. You can hack away at sort of American federal expenditures, which run into a couple of trillion a year, and have you can make off with your slice without a lot of people noticing.
Let me shift you away from these types of discussions for a moment. I want to kind of really pick your mind on a particular decade and kind of roll it forward. I'd like to talk about the 70s a little bit. I'd like to talk about long-term interest rates, very long-term, going back literally hundreds of years, and kind of outline what took place in the 70s and then into the early 80s to counteract the inflation in the 70s, and kind of map that out. Because when I look at a long-term chart, and I'm looking at one of your PowerPoints right now, and as you say, we're going to stay long and low for a long time.
So the basic story is this, we're the same generation. When we did our econ classes, there was a moment of ferment and tension in the discipline because the old Keynesian macro orthodoxy was under assault, had been for some time. But the stagflation of the 70s, the simultaneous combination of inflation and unemployment, seemed to discredit Keynesian models. Now, I always thought that was a horseshit argument. There's perfectly consistent ways of doing it in Keynesian models. But in a sense, it was a generational shift. The guys who ran the shop from the 40s to the 70s were on the way out, and then the young Turks from the 60s and 70s were in. And the system had generated an awful lot of inflation. Now, why had it done that? Well, simple way to think about it is after World War II and the Great Depression, the one thing you don't want coming back is unemployment, mass unemployment, because then people turn fascist and burn your house down. The policy response of governments right across the world, from the United States to Sweden and back, was we have to maintain full employment. So to do that, you have to put finance in a box to stop capital seeking its highest return internationally. You like things that you can buy and sell and drop on your foot, which are seen to be job creating rather than just paper chasing. You really regulate your banking system in such a way that you don't have financial bubbles. And you empower labour to share productivity gains through COLA contracts, cost of living adjustment contracts, or corporatism arrangements in Europe. Basically, this is the golden age. This is when the American middle class does best. This is what the French call the Trente Glorieuses, and it's all great. Well, it's all great except for the fact that, think about the following. If you run full employment, like very tight labour markets, in the 19s, from the 40s through the 60s in the United States, and you're fighting giant wars in Southeast Asia off the books, your real rate of unemployment is probably about 2%. In that case, the dumbest guy in your firm can leave at lunchtime and get another job by 4 p.m. at a higher wage. The only way businesses can cope with this, particularly if they want to get skilled labour, is constantly paying more in wages. And the only way they can maintain their profit margins in that instance is by raising prices. So you've got a wage price spiral and you're pushing up inflation. At the same time, you have the end of the so-called Bretton Woods arrangements, which basically stopped international capital from flowing around the place, the growth of what were called the euro markets, dollar deposits, all of which were unleashing inflationary forces into the world. So seen in the long term, the 1960s and 70s and 80s was this very weird blip. 6 of the 10 great interest rate spikes in history occurred in that one decade. Now, when we were learning economics, we sampled that bit of the distribution and said, that's how the world works. There's always inflation, and you have to be ever vigilant, and we need to have central banks and all this sort of stuff. And that's what we learned from that. But if you look at the long term, it's such an anomaly. Because the long-term real rate of interest is about 2% for the entire globe. Now, you're looking at the chart I got from a Japanese macroeconomist, but there's a guy at the Bank of England. If you go to bankunderground.co.uk, there's a guy who's went back and really looked at this and calculated all these interest rates from the 1300s with using much better measures, much more comprehensive measures. And his conclusion is exactly the same, that basically the real rate of interest, when you globalize the pool of capital, is about 2%. That's where we are. The notion, particularly when you've globalized labor markets and taken all the inflationary pressure out of it, because that's why wage stagnation exists. You can't have wage stagnation and wage-driven inflation at the same time. And if you don't have inflation, the only rationale for raising interest rates is Larry Summers' one. You need to raise it now because the next time we have a financial bust, you need room to cut them. People are like, we're going to normalize, we're going to go back 4 or 5%. You might get there, but you're not going to stay there because the long-run real rate is pretty low.
And this inflation fear, though, the way this has been used for decades to go at, as you talk about it in some of your work here, the definition of a stupid economic idea. I mean, the way this fear of inflation has been used to essentially rig the economy now. When does that fear ever subside? Or do the people in power realize that that fear is a useful tool to ultimately just keep power?
Yeah, there's 2 fears. One is deficits. As far as I'm aware, no one's ever died of a deficit. But nonetheless, we have this fear that if you run budget deficits, the Weimar Republic is coming. In fact, the Weimar Republic is coming to Europe precisely because of this fear that if you don't balance your budget, regardless of economic conditions, all hell will break loose. And instead of which, what it does do, it increases unemployment, it produces deflation, and it empowers populists. There's a stupid economic idea. And the inflation one, I mean, it's real in the following sense. If you were a lender, if you were a creditor, if you were an investor in the 1970s, inflation had gotten higher than the rate of return on your expected rate of return. Let's say that you invest for a 5-year period, you expect to get 5%, and the inflation rate's 10%. You might as well take your money around the back of the house and burn it. So investment collapses. And it collapses at a time that it impacts future expectations of investment. And guess what? Unemployment goes up at the same time as you get inflation. The more fundamental point being, if you were a creditor in the 70s, you got hammered. So if you want to have capitalism, and I believe it or not, I am a fan, if you want to have a capitalism that works for everybody, you do actually have to have a real rate of return which is positive. Otherwise, investment dies. And that was a big problem in the 70s. So restoring the real value of investment was the Thatcher-Reagan project. What it did, however, was also hyper-financialize the economy, cause wage stagnation, and lead to a type of inequality in distribution that I think that if Reagan and Thatcher had been alive today, they probably would have said, hey, guys, I think we've went a bit too far.
Let me dig back in time a little bit here. I want to take you back to some foundations. You've got this great Scottish accent. We all know that there's some fantastic thinkers that have come out of that country. Why don't you take me back in time a little bit and give me some names, give me a point. I mean, we all know the names of Smith, Hume, etc. But give me something that influenced you early on from the great Scottish thinkers. What was the real drive for you? What did you take out of it as a young man?
Well, that's a weird thing. As a young man, I mean, I was raised on a diet of sort of contemporary macro. I mean, I wasn't really that turned on to the Scottish Enlightenment until much later. And the history of political thought became a kind of a passion in graduate school. But when I was younger, it was really the idea of Keynes. I mean, it just made sense to me living through the recessions of the 1980s as a very young guy, and then going to school in the recessions of the mid-1980s. It was just permanent recessions. That it just seemed to me clear that the macro economy is different from the micro. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. The collective action theory in any way tells you that individual decisions can be individually rational but collectively disastrous. When you look at it that way, the notion that we have to have this scalable thing that's based on individuals and their expectations, the so-called micro foundations, just struck me as nonsense. That ultimately the macro is different. That's a belief that I have maintained all the way through. Now, can you trace that back? Not really to the Scottish Enlightenment, but what I do take away from Smith is, first of all, Smith is quoted and nobody ever reads him. But if you do go back and bother to read Smith, I mean, a lot of the stuff that he talks about is very contemporary. The role of public goods, the notion that the state is important for regulation, all of that's actually in Smith, but all you ever get is this stuff about the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and self-interest, which isn't even in the Wealth of Nations. That's in the theory of moral sentiments. My sort of attraction to those guys came later in life when I was attempting to figure out why it is that we think the way that we do. And you can see the hangovers of these ways of thinking. So Hume's essays on money and on interest could be written today if it wasn't for the rather prosaic language of the latter half of the 18th century that affects them. To me, it started with Keynes. It never really changed. I read Kaleki's 1944 essay, 10 pages in the Political Quarterly when I was an undergraduate. That literally floored me. The guy predicted the 1970s and the 1940s in 10 pages. It's astonishing. So that's the stuff that's really had an effect on me.
You lay out the individual versus the macro perspective. I'll pass along a personal view, and you can either correct me or go down the path. I look at decision-making in America right now, and so many people, the electorate, have a hand in decision-making. Let's just talk about kind of like the local and county state level where development can be literally hindered because so many people will get involved and block things. And if you really drive across America, you can see across cities, yeah, there's some redevelopment, but a lot of things just don't get done anymore. I mean, look, Manhattan would not be built today. With today's mindset, most of what was built in Manhattan would not be built. If I want to contrast that to something like China, Vietnam, Singapore, where you've had these benevolent dictators, essentially, really in the last 20, 30 years do pretty good things from a macro perspective for their economies. And that's an interesting thing, I think, for Americans in particular to accept. Like, hold on, how are the Chinese building Shanghai in 10 years and we can't get a new bridge built?
No, I think that's true. I mean, Larry Summers actually had a famous piece on this about the redevelopment of a bridge in Boston. And once he took account of all the people involved, the Historic Commission, the Preservation Commission, the environment, whatever, he came to the conclusion that, you might want to spend money on infrastructure to stimulate the economy, but it gets gummed up and nothing happens. I think that's very much a rich person's problem, however, in the sense it's NIMBY, not in my backyard. I like the way things are. If you go to Minnesota, you go out to Michigan, then you're looking at collapsed infrastructure, roads that haven't really been seriously repaired and resurfaced since the 1980s. And that has to do with lunatic tax policy at the state level. They've got a collapse in the tax base. Politicians in the state level in the United States have just been basically elected by doing nothing but cut taxes for the past 20 years. And eventually that seems to have hit the buffers when we had the Oklahoma and spreading from Oklahoma teacher strikes recently, where teachers just came out and said, I can't have 90 students and 23 textbooks. This is insane. You cannot pay us less and less every year and expect us to stay in the profession. And I look at that. I don't look at NIMBY problems. I think NIMBY problems happen in Manhattan. But I think that when you look at the rest of the country, what you just see is a chronic lack of investment because the political classes have done nothing but enrich themselves and their buddies by cutting taxes for the past 30 years.
As I mentioned earlier, you've talked about in many of your presentations the definition of a stupid economic idea. I'd be amiss at this point in time as we kind of lay out some of this territory, this landscape in front of us across the globe. Given your experience, given your study, your research, what would be a couple of the big things we could do from a macro perspective? Look, nothing's going to be immediate, nothing's going to happen overnight, but what would be some of those macro moments, those macro directions we could take as a society that would, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, get us to a better place?
What would be a good one? I don't know. How about this? What was the real effective rate of taxation on Apple in 2016? 0.
They hide all their money somewhere else outside of America.
So you have a situation in which corporates around the world are net savers and they pay pretty much no taxes. In 2010, because of write-offs, I paid more taxes personally than General Electric. That just can't be right. If you don't have corporates paying taxes, and they used to pay about between 15 and 20% of all taxes across the OECD and up to the 1970s, then you end up with ludicrously high profit margins, which is what you've got across many industries, particularly digital industries. This is why Google and Amazon, the rest of these guys are so rich and so powerful. They're also monopolists, which means that they either buy the opposition or they crush the opposition. So we're creating a very unhealthy, monopolized, cartelized economy, where the corporates have got so much money, they're net savers. Now, governments are so afraid of deficits and doing anything at all that pisses off the investor classes that they too are net savers. They're running basically austerity budgets right across the world. So the only people left that can do anything are consumers. And consumers are net spenders mainly because their wages aren't high enough and they're continually spending money that they don't have by borrowing more from the financial sector. That's ludicrous. Number one, bust up the big monopolies, get a more competitive economy. Number two, pay taxes. I don't care if it's a flat tax on corporations, but let's make it a real one, 10%, everybody in, nobody out. With that, you could generate a huge amount of money for actually reinvesting in infrastructure. When the reason you do this isn't because it creates jobs, it's because it creates long-term productivity gains. It's very hard to see how you could create long-term productivity gains with infrastructure where you can make stuff, but you can't move it because the roads are so crap. So there's so much low-hanging fruit around here that starts with the maldistribution of profits and income, which we have allowed to happen, we have engineered to happen, because the political classes have been utterly beholden to the investor class.
So as you mentioned the busting up of monopolies, I've been pondering this myself recently. We're talking the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world. And you've made the prediction about the populism rise from Trump to Brexit to others. Do you see this as the path? I mean, because, now that Trump's been in there, I don't recall Trump. I mean, he's talked a little bit about it, but I haven't really heard anybody go in a serious, let's raise the bar, Rosie O'Donnell level of like monopoly busting. And it does seem a little bit crazy. Jeff Bezos is brilliant. He's super successful. But, at some point in time, a guy that potentially could have $1 trillion net worth, something's gone wrong.
Absolutely. But also, let's do a Chicago model on this, right? What's the consumer surplus? Well, basically, everybody benefits because Amazon does it cheaper and everybody gets more stuff, so everybody benefits. So why worry about monopoly? Well, first of all, there's the latent problem. Once you've destroyed all of your competitor, what's there to stop you abusing that? Secondly, these organizations have more information about us than the security services do. And we know from Facebook's recent travails that they monetize this. You have these private companies that have the type of information that the East German secret police would have died for. And they're monetizing it with no oversight whatsoever, becoming more and more powerful, knocking out the competition. I can't see how that ends up as a good society, because ultimately ends up with 3 or 4 people making most of the returns to most of the investment, saying, just trust me, everything's okay. And you can bet that they'll have bought off every single politician along the way. So I'm often a critic of the European Union, even though I'm a fan of the basic political European project, not so much of the monetary one. But I got to applaud what the European Competition Commissioner Vestager's been doing by going after Google and Amazon and Facebook, putting this thing down called the General Data Protection Initiative, which has given everybody these really annoying emails about opting in and opting out. Because basically what they're saying is, hey, buddy, we're the state. We can blow up your business model. So why don't you play ball, start being responsible with your data, and more importantly, start paying some taxes? Because if you don't, we can make life really difficult for you. And that's exactly what we should be doing. Why the hell we're giving these people such a buy, I have no idea.
Do you perceive anything on the horizon, though, where there really will become at least an American attempt to say Amazon's too big, Google's too big, Facebook's too big? Do you see that on the horizon?
I do, because if you look at American history over the very long run, the United States swings from periods of intense monopoly and concentration. Think the period of the Railway Trust, the Finance Trust, through the Sherman Act, through deregulation, through demonopolization, through using the courts to bust these things up. Then you get into the 1960s and 1970s, the process starts again. Then we get into the 1980s, the airlines are busted up, the banks are busted up. You then end up with sort of demonopolization with 9X, with the phone companies. We forget our own history. We do quite a lot of this. And this time it's really serious, because these types of digital tools and platforms are so powerful and so pervasive in our lives that the argument is very simple. These are public infrastructure. They should not be run for private gain.
Let me take you back in time to 10 years ago, October 2008. I surely thought that the ATMs were going to stop working by what they were telling us on the local news shows. But since that time, we've had essentially pretty low volatility. The notion of tail risk, potential black swans, I think people are starting to forget it's even a concept anymore. Is it even possible anymore? How do you perceive the landscape of the markets right now in terms of that particular perspective? Because it really does look like we have really finally reached that point that the notion of, well, it's just going to be permanent low volatility. Tail risks? Who's paying for tail risk? You're paying for tail risk? Come on, short vol, right?
It's totally insane. So let's think about this one. Let's start very micro. There's a great piece in Grant's Interest Rate Observer about this. I forget the guy who made the point, but I'm citing him nonetheless. He pointed out that Exxon had a crappy quarter a little while ago. Now, if you have a crappy quarter as a big company, you expect analysts to say that's bad, and then you're going to get some kind of downgrade, and then your share price will be impacted. And yet, despite that, the share price went up. And Apple's earnings calls every time, doesn't really matter what they say, share price goes up. Why? Because these stocks are embedded in all of the big ETFs. And so long as people are buying ETFs and the ETFs are optimizing the index and the index is going up, then essentially price discovery and all that stuff that you associate with markets kind of dies. Because you have this technology now that's almost 50% of the market called passive investing. It basically, whether it's a tiny little algorithm that's out there running in milliseconds or a life cycle in your pension, they all have the same structure. They're all optimization machines over a defined time horizon, and basically they all have stop loss limits, and none of them are allowed to hold cash. Add to this the central banking community that's so desperate to lower volatility and encourage investment. They've chucked trillions of dollars into the global economy through QE. There's no inflation anywhere, by the way, so much for the monetary theory of inflation. But nonetheless, they've managed to suppress vol. So then the little robots that are just robots just accept low vol as the normality of life, and they go about their buying and they're selling and they're optimizing, and the index goes up and up and up. Now let's think about what's going on here. The European Union are simultaneously dealing with Trump's tariffs, Putin's malfeasant actions, the Brexit stupidity, and the Italians as a mortal threat. Is any of this showing up in any of the indexes? Nope. In the United States, we have Donald Trump as president, and the market's been going up and up and up. So we are utterly blind to risk. Let's think this one through. What's causing this? I deeply worry about all the passives in the market, because ultimately they don't know what to do if something really bad happens, because they're not programmed to sit on the sidelines. They can't hold cash. If you imagine a world in which, for example, the Italians decide to really pull the plug on the euro or push the Germans into a corner, and you get a really severe market shock, what happens if you've got 50% of the market being traded by passives? Well, they'll probably all sell at once. Well, the argument is, well, it doesn't matter because there's active money on the other side that'll pick it up. That's how active money works. It sees something falling, it picks it up, it's not going to make it back. But the thing is, you've murdered active money. It's so cheap to buy passives that basically the amount of active money in the market is declining all the time. So imagine a world in which you have an enormous number of bids out there and there's no asks, and you just have this huge gap between the two. That's when you could see a massive correction. Not just the return of volatility, like a one-day spike that will scare the bejesus out of everybody. Now, we saw an example of how this could work in February with the VIX affair, the short of the VIX. This could go systemic, right? When nobody's paying attention to this, because we're in this la-la land where there's no such thing as volatility anymore. This is reminiscent of when Gordon Brown, the British Premier, at that time Finance Minister, says that, we've abolished the business cycle. It's like the minute anybody says anything like that, short the hell out of them.
As you were talking about the passives, and I start to think about the efficient market hypothesis, and it's like, okay, and that's on one side of the ledger. The other side of the ledger is Daniel Kahneman. And I just think that if thinking people look at that kind of division and read both sides, to me, it just seems like Kahneman wins. I don't know how thinking people can really say, this Kahneman stuff, it was good for a period of time, but here's the new way over here.
The thing about it is, right, if the efficient market's hypothesis, the weak form is true, right? So basically, there are no $10,000 notes lying on the floor consistently waiting for people to pick them up. Like, opportunities will be arbitrage. But if it's a strong form, then, why are there consistent opportunities to arbitrage? Why is it possible to make consistent alpha? Right? That shouldn't happen. And that's a piece of sort of technological justification for markets to exist in the form that they do so that super profits can be made. I regard it as a political technology. I don't even regard it as a serious economic idea.
Mark, we could go on all day. I could sit here and pick your mind. I think ending it kind of on the thought process of tail risks and volatility eliminated, that's a good place to stop because, let's just see what happens, right? Who knows what's going to happen? We're going to go another 10 years, huh? Do you think it's possible we could even go another 10 years like the last 10 years? I think that's a bet I want to take.
The thing is, we often say stranger things have happened, right? But, have stranger things happened? You'd be talking about the elimination of a cycle which is embedded deep within capitalism that comes from the basic actions of exogenous and endogenous shocks impacting investor expectations, the tendency of investors to hoard into particular markets at a particular time, to cluster, to overinvest in certain stocks or securities or pieces of capital, and the boomy, slumpy nature of capitalism, what Schumpeter identified as its creative destruction dynamic. It seems to me to be hardwired into it. It's the DNA of capitalism. And what we've done through basically central bank action and through the shift into passives and a few other things is to basically shatter that. And also the rise of these monopolies that basically buy up competition and eliminate volatility through those mechanisms are also important, plus emerging technological issues, which we haven't really talked about, such as AI, etc., and the optimization of big data. There's lots of things out there which are pushing down, but I mean, like we started mentioning Nassim, so let's end mentioning Nassim. Nassim liked the idea, and I wrote about it with him in Foreign Affairs a few years ago, of volatility constraints. That ultimately what you're doing is you're pushing down on suppressed vol because it's still there, it's just suppressed. If he's right, and he usually is right, eventually that vol has to come out.
That is such a true statement, right? And usually he is right. When I go to his Twitter feed, I'm just like, you read through and you're just like, what is the need that some people have to be wrong to go debate him? I don't get it. They know they're wrong. It's like they want to be whipped. They want to be punched. They know they're wrong.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, a lot of let's say, he's not overtly political in a sense that he's not a political writer, but there are definitely political conclusions which tend towards the libertarian that come out of his writings, which I'm personally not comfortable with. But that doesn't mean I then say that he's wrong about these things. I mean, sometimes we just have to admit the limits of our own knowledge.
Good stuff, Mark. I appreciate it. Stay on the straight and narrow. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep making really interesting predictions. Hey, where's the best place we can send people? Where would you like them to go to check you out, find out more information? Where can we send them?
I promised myself I would actually build a proper YouTube channel, and maybe this summer I'll finally get around to doing that. But the best thing to do is just basically hit the videos on YouTube. So, you'll get it from there. We'll take it from there. I'm also trying to rebuild a proper website, but I don't even know if people actually go to prop websites anymore. I mean, don't people just go to YouTube? I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
I think they do go to proper websites, but when somebody like yourself has a million videos with millions and millions of views, I think that's a better place to send them.
It's like blogging. Like people are like, why don't you blog? And I'm like, but first of all, I don't have something new to say every day. I deeply distrust anyone who does have something new to say every day, because it means that you must be inconsistent on some level. More importantly, people don't read anymore. What they do is they watch. And if you can give people an interesting visual story while talking to them in a language and in a way that they can understand and engage with, that's actually way more effective than anything else.
Mark, good stuff. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
All the best.
In advance of this call, it jogged memories back for me because my first book came out in 2004 and then another book in 2007. Nowhere near your numbers, but for an author to sell 100,000 plus in the investment book space, okay, this is noteworthy. I started thinking about my third book, and I'm going through those bookstores, and it's like every inspiration I had was like, I don't want to do like everybody else is doing. I want to do like this guy Gittimer. That's who I want to do. I want to make a little red book of selling in the investment space. But let me tell you what happened. So it ended up becoming, your book really inspired me for my Ten Commandments book. But the thing that I really wanted to address with you and let you comment on it, let you run with it, through the publishing circles world, when I started asking about your book, the word that I got, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding, is that one of the initial reasons that book had so much success was how you did it initially. My understanding is that you did everything in-house, basically had the book fully produced, and already had sold a lot of copies, and then went to a publisher for wider distribution.
I did do everything in-house. The book actually took about a year longer to produce than I thought it would, because I wanted to put everything I had into it. The publisher, Bard Press, actually came up with the idea. We were sitting in a Mexican restaurant in Austin, Texas, and he said, Harvey Pinnock put out that little red book of golf. I think you should write the little red book of selling. He sold 1.5 million copies. You'll sell more. And I started on a napkin. I started to pen out some of the chapter titles. And chapter 1 is Kick Your Own Ass. And chapter 12.5 is Resign Your Position as General Manager of the Universe. And I knew that I had to write something about networking, about asking questions, about humor. Literally, I halfway fleshed out the book at that restaurant. I came home and I started to write, and then I got diverted, and then I started to write, and then I got diverted. But I hired a designer for typesetting. And that's one of the secrets of books. Publishers can't design worth a shit. So I charged the publisher for my design guy. they can't refute it because I've won awards for design and I've sold millions of copies of books as a result of it. So they end up doing it. Even Amazon on this, the book we're going to talk about today, Truthful Living, I designed this book. They didn't. And it was it was almost a fist fight as to who was going to, do the design. I said, look, send me all the design awards you've won, and then we'll talk about it. And they didn't have any.
That's funny though, because here you've already got the street cred of 5 million plus for the Little Red Book of selling. And I know Amazon is new to the ballgame for being a publisher now a little bit, but why would they want to debate with you? You've kind of got a track record there.
You know what? Let me tell you something though. They may be new to the publishing game, but they're already number one. I have never, I've been doing this for 25 years. Amazon is head and shoulders above any other publisher / printer / book distributor I've ever seen. They have their shit together, totally.
Well, that's a great tip for me that I will figure out how to execute on. Trust me.
Let me put you in touch with my agent who has that inside connection. His name is from Literary Management, and he is the brightest guy in New York City in the publishing business. And he's the one that made this connection happen. Amazon is the future, period. Well, if you wanted to republish your book of Trend Commandments, what a great title, by the way. I bought it for the frickin' title. And then I perused the book inside. They have you can go inside of it pretty decent on Google. I looked at your chapter titles, and you think like I think. So I was excited.
Listen, I'm not joking. That was literally, my publisher at the time was Pearson, Financial Times, Prentice Hall, all those names. And I was working with a guy named Jim Boyd, and I was literally having the conversation. I want to do something, I kept saying your last name, like Gittimer's done. That's what I want. And of course, I didn't know your full process, so I was only able to get some aspects of the full creativity that you get, your full design,
Well, I can tell you this. The Little Red Book of Selling is now the best-selling sales book of all time. We were on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list for 103 straight weeks. Nobody will crack that one in the sales field, even in the personal development field. It was an unbelievable process, but we invested in placement. We invested in airports. We invested in Barnes & Noble. But in those days, if your book made the list, all of the bookstores would put it face out in a special place. So it was always in the front of the store. If you're number 12 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list or number 7 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, every freaking week, people pick the book up. And it's Michael, it still sells.
That does not surprise me at all. And look, before we jump into your newest book here, The First Writings of Napoleon Hill, Truthful Living, I made a note to myself about the Little Red Book. I kind of jotted it down here in a highlighter. And I said to myself, who throws it away? Nobody throws that book away ever.
Nobody. Here's what happens. People lend it to somebody else and they never give it back. I get at least a dozen orders a week of somebody that says, I gave this to somebody, they never returned it. I need another copy.
I mean, look, you've been at this game for a long time. You've got a lot of experience, but you must have had in your process, your thinking, that as you were putting that together, you knew that you wanted to create not only would the textual content, the words, images, etc., resonate, and you would deliver the goods that way, but you knew you wanted to have almost a piece of art that people, all the way from the little ribbon that hangs through the page reminder. I mean, you knew you wanted all of these details, and you knew how critical that was going to be.
I'll share a secret with you. 10 years before the Little Red Book was an idea, my friend and photographer Mitchell Carney here in Charlotte gave me a book for Christmas called Paris Out of Hand, printed by Chronicle, I believe. And it looked exactly like the Little Red Book. And I said, one day I'm going to have a book like this. It had an upside down graphic of the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it was just the coolest little book on the planet. When Ray Bard said the Little Red Book, the first thing I thought of is, I know exactly what this book's going to look like. And I called Chronicle and they wouldn't give me the resource for the printing. I mean, like, seriously. 5 minutes later, I found out where it was printed, and I called the lady back, gave her a slight expletive tirade about how sources are no longer secret. And then I gave her 2 more sources in China that I thought she could do a better job with the book next time.
Let's point something out too for some out there that have not seen this book. The details go to the color, multicolor. I've not held the book in my hands for multiple years, so this is all on memory. It's multiple color, it's a heavier paper, it's glossy, it's got a beveled edge, I believe. It's got a kind of a cloth cover on the front. It's just every damn detail that one would want as an author. This is when I was trying to put my third book together. When I listen to you, I say the same thing. I'm like, one day I'm going to pull off what you pulled off.
You're creative enough. You've already created the concept, the titles. You know what you're doing. I think what you need is a publisher and distribution.
Even though it's a conversation between me and you right now, your Amazon tip is probably going to be a tip that a lot of people are going to be like, Mr. Amazon, please talk to me now too.
Well, I'll give you my person, but I think it's only fair that you go through my agent because he's the one that set everything up. I can also tell you that Amazon has graciously provided me with an outside PR firm, and they're going fucking gangbusters. If you have the right book, they will back it. If you go to a standard publisher today, they have their own, quote, marketing person who's usually a journalist graduate from a recent graduate from high school who's almost like an intern, and they will do 4 or 5 things for you, and that's it. This PR firm has already done 30, including this interview with you, has already done 30 things for me, and we haven't even started because Amazon has hired them for 6 weeks after the launch. So that's October 30th literally through the end of the year.
It's funny. Usually my podcast is something where I will go find people. Occasionally I'm connected. I'm friends with Ryan Holiday, and Ryan has graciously sent me some really nice guests over the years. But you're right. Your PR person reached out to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got this whole backstory with Jeff, and I get a chance to talk to him.
It helps to have a kind of a name and a kind of a reputation. I can tell you that. But what is happening right now with respect to this Napoleon Hill book is literally, it's scary to me.
I'm holding your galley right now, so this is going to be a hardcover, I assume.
Yes, it will be. But take a look inside the galley. Is the book autographed?
It is.
When is the last time you ever got a galley copy from a publisher?
You know the answer.
Right. It's a 2-word answer. Fucking never. And the reason that I did it is that I'm sick of getting galley copies and hard copies from PR firms or from publishers, and no one even signs their name to the letter. It's crazy. So I demanded at Amazon that they let me sign all the galley copies. They printed about 1,000 of them. When I'm dead, you might want to go on eBay and get your money out of this one.
As people are listening to you right now, though, on something simple sounding like signing a galley copy, and people that don't know about galleys, these are the pre-release copies sent to people like me. You're giving a lesson in sales right now, a very important one.
It's called personalization, so that the person feels connected before they even start to read. It becomes wow when they open up the page and they see that the author signed it, and then someone else has to read it slightly more voraciously.
I admit, I was very surprised. I've never seen it before. You've not sent me any kind of wire payment. I've never seen a galley signed before, ever.
The next one you see signed will be my next book with Amazon.
Oh, and by the way, too, the galley that they sent me is basically essentially the same quality that you would see in most paperback editions or nicer of a finished book.
Right. I refused to let them do it crappy. I hounded them to make sure that at least the galley copy would be something that someone would not throw away. And by signing it, it's definitely not been thrown away. And I'll tell you, I've had 12 people proactively send me email for the galley copy thanking me.
Well, I got to tell you something really funny too. My girlfriend saw it, and she started looking through a bunch of books that I had, and she said, "Well, can I have this one?" And I said, "Okay, you can have it." That was before I read it, and then when I started reading it, I saw the signature inside. I'm thinking to myself, "Oh man, I really don't want to give it to her now."
Exactly.
We should shift into there because I could keep picking your mind about everything. And this is a really cool book. And the content is timeless, as you know. Let's set the stage here. I don't know if you saw the movie, but recently a movie came out called The Founder about Ray Kroc. And in that movie, he's listening to some old motivational tapes. This is set in the 40s and 50s. I don't think it's Napoleon Hill. I think it's somebody else. But it's the same kind of headspace. For me, for my audience, give the mini bio on Napoleon Hill. When did you first come into contact with the name and his thinkings?
In 1972, if anyone alive can remember back that far, my twin daughters were just born. I was in a marriage that was not going to last. I was pretty much broke and I had no direction. I joined a troupe of guys who were in, at that time, multi-level marketing. And the leader of that troupe was Glenn Turner in a company called Dare to Be Great. 5 guys, me and 4 other guys, met every morning in a sales meeting for 4 hours from 8 until noon, every day for 1 year. In that meeting, we read, we watched a movie called Challenge to America by Glenn Turner. We listened to The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, and we did a book report on 1 chapter of Think and Grow Rich every day. Now, there's only 15 chapters in the book, so the book was, we would go through the book every month. And I literally read from cover to cover that book 10 times in 1 year. And after about the 3rd reading, I got a positive attitude. I can't explain what happened, but I can tell you exactly where I was at the time that I realized, oh, I got it. And I was in New Jersey. People in New Jersey, positive attitude, I think, is a jailable offense. You can't take it away from me now. And it's because of Napoleon Hill. He was the founding father in America of positive thinking and personal development, not just how you have to think positive and be positive, but what are all the elements in going into being a success? And this guy and this book in 1917 at the George Washington Institute in Chicago, he had a course on advertising and selling. But at the end of every lesson, he wrote his philosophy for succeeding and how and why, and positive thinking and ambition and desire and all of the elements that go into it. After he passed away, the Napoleon Hill Foundation found these works 20 years before Think and Grow Rich came out. Now, Think and Grow Rich has sold 100 million copies. It's the benchmark book of, the magnum opus of Napoleon Hill. But this writing from 1917 is the foundation of that. I'm reading this stuff. The Napoleon Hill Foundation, just a slight backstory, as a gratitude for my positive attitude, I was introduced to the Napoleon Hill Foundation by Charlie Tremendous Jones, who was my mentor in speaking. I volunteered to do the newsletter for the Napoleon Hill Foundation, Napoleon Hill Yesterday and Today. I've been publishing that for more than 10 years, gratis, just as a thank you. Every Friday, it goes out to about 50 or 60,000 people. They came to me and said, hey, we found this stuff. Do you want to write or annotate, Hill's original writings? I'm like, hell yes, I do. That took 2 years. Like, I went through every lesson, everything. I took away all of the sales part of it, and I just left what's called after the lesson visits with Napoleon Hill. And I'm going to tell you, Michael, it's absolutely unbelievable. My girlfriend was the editor, and as she's editing, she's texting me going, have you seen this one? Have you seen this quote? And she's like texting me quotes from the book. It's very inspirational.
Let me read one really quick. I'm going to try and read it quickly, but it's a great one. It says, you may be wealthy for all I know. That isn't success. You may have a splendid education for all I know, but that isn't success either. You may have wealthy parents, but neither is that success. For you must remember that wealth, as measured in dollars and cents, is an evasive thing, which sometimes takes wings and flies away. The only real, permanent, and worthwhile success is represented by the character you are building. And you know what? When you read that, you can't help but feel energized.
Exactly. There are 100 of those quotes in this book, plus all the information. As you peruse the book, you see the little maroon full page quotes. We had to limit them. I had to literally go through and select those quotes that I thought would be most appropriate. I also have to tell you that I just finished recording the book. And because I didn't write it, and because it was written 100 years ago where lexicon was different, it literally took me 15 hours to record a book that would have normally taken me 5.
I had never practiced what I just read right there, and I agree with you. The lexicon is different. And as you read it, you have to kind of quickly do the mental gymnastics to get around it.
Let me throw something just from the very beginning of the book, as long as you're reading a quote. He says, believe in what you are doing and in those who are helping you do it, and you are bound to win. In that quote, he's saying, hey, gather a bunch of people around that support you, believe in yourself, and now you have a team of people instead of just one person going for it. This guy's freaking brilliant. And this is before the cars had paved roads. There was no airplanes. There was no anything. No TV, no computer, no nothing. You had a checking account. If you wanted to go someplace, you took a train. And he's sitting there espousing what's going to happen 100 years from now, literally. And he was right. He predicted Amazon and Walmart.
What's so nice about his work is in a world right now where people are, kind of got attention deficit disorder. They're jumping around to this headline and that headline. And what I love about the work that you've put together here is the breaking it down to the bare essence of thinking. And what I love also too, and this is from Napoleon Hill, this is his classic opener, thoughts are things. And that's very difficult, in my humble opinion, that's very difficult for initially at least 95% of the population, whatever population, to accept. Thoughts are things.
The thoughts are things quote doesn't come until almost 2/3 through the book. And when I saw it, my blood ran cold. Like, okay, here's the beginning of the process. And he's telling me, literally as a reader of his early writings, oh, I found it myself. I'm going to use this from now on forever. It's pretty cool. I mean, this book is historical as much as it is challenging and inspirational. It lays it out. It tells you exactly what to do. He does it in a way where he doesn't say, you're a jackass if you don't do this. He's just saying, hey, this is what I do. He's one of his quotes at the very early part of the book is finish what you start. He clarifies it by saying, the time has come for you to succeed, but you cannot do it without finishing what you start. Like, dude, way to go. I think that there's a deep thinking behind this. This guy had to go home at night and marvel at the electric light, by the way, when he turned it on. That's one of his things. He goes, wow, Thomas Edison invented this thing. Look, I can just flip the switch and the light comes on. We don't think about that today. We have LED lights that come from China that you turn them on and they're way better than any light has ever been before. But the bottom, and they don't get hot and whatever the deal is. But it was a marvel back then. The phone was a marvel back then. The automobile was a marvel back then. The typewriter was a marvel back then. Think about all of the elements that went into early part of our own industrial revolution. The cash register was a big deal. Hill did this all in what we would refer to as primitive times, literally primitive times. Can you imagine a guy with no cell phone?
When I read a sentence of his, and this is going across the work that you've put together here, there's no excuses. You read the sentence, and it's almost like you've now got horse blinders on. If you jump off the sentence, you're making excuses. Like, the sentences are so pure. If you leave it, you yourself know that you're doing the wrong thing.
Very compelling. And I'll tell you, I got a much deeper understanding, having edited the book and gone through the process, at least 10 reads of it before I ever turned it in, and annotated it and put my own, writings in there. But I didn't touch his. I left his words pure. But reading the book out loud, like I just did this past week, it's a whole new insight. I have a digital studio. I'm very fortunate. We have a really solid crew of people because we're podcasting now 5 days a week, and I record all kinds of all my YouTube videos. Everything's done in studio. my producer was going, wow, that's really cool. And I was stopping going, do you realize what he just said? So the edits are boundless in this piece. It was uber inspirational to do it. And it's made me a much bigger expert on the book, I can tell you that.
Let me keep it at something that I just brought up a moment ago, where the notion of thoughts are things. I'll really elaborate and kind of tear that apart, peel back the onion some. But also, there's a sentence that I jotted down from the book: 95% of those out there, and this is not meant to be some kind of like, ad hominem or something negative about people, but 95% of people really don't know how to think. It is an acquired skill.
What he says in Thoughts Are Things, he's saying that everything that was ever invented and everything that you look at every day began as a thought before it ever materialized. He's telling the reader that if you're not thinking of something new, you're never going to do anything new. You don't just wake up and say, okay, I'm going to do something cool. No, it started in your mind and manifests itself. Maybe you thought about it, then you sort of jotted it down, and then a week later you came back and edited it, but you're still thinking. Your mind is still going through that thought process. Every one of your listeners right now, you've been in the shower or you've just gone for a run, and all of a sudden a thought pops in your mind, mostly because your mind was clear, but that thought will vanish if you don't write it down immediately. And it is the beginning. It's that the seed of whatever it is that you're trying to plant. By writing it down, you're starting to water it. You've planted it, you've started to water it. But it began as a thought. And when he says thoughts are things, he's saying all of these things began as a thought. Then someone did something about it, and it manifests itself as a light bulb or an automobile or a telephone or an airplane. That's the process. The Wright brothers thought about flying in Dayton, Ohio, but didn't take off until they got the Kitty Hawk. That's what he's saying there. And it's so freaking deep and so freaking brilliant that you pass it by.
It's 3 words, and you're right, it's so deep, but it's 3 words.
What he says all along in the book is everything that you touch or do or feel or wear started as a thought. That's the process by which he is sticking to as an underlying theme throughout the entire book. Think about it. Think about it.
Those 3 critical words, what they do in my mind is they transmit to the individual, you have power. It's now on you. Your thoughts are things. You as the individual have immense power, but you probably just don't yet know it.
That is totally correct. And most people overlook their own power because they're too busy watching television like a fool. But let me throw something at you. He talks about these elements, these 5 basic elements of enthusiasm, self-confidence, concentration, and imagination and desire. And what he's saying, all of that is thought. All of it is thought. Think about imagination, desire, enthusiasm, self-confidence, and concentration. They're all thought. He's telling you, dude, get into your own head. You're going to start to succeed. Until you do, you're working for somebody else, getting to work on time at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to do jack shit.
I love this podcast, Jeff, because there's nowhere else that I know of that I could have turned on any TV show in the United States of America in the last year to hear what you're saying.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Michael.
I'm serious. That can sound flattering, but I'm saying it as an objective fact too. Because if I turn on any news show, if I turn on something else, it's all about everything else that's not important.
Blame and bullshit. Those are the 2 things that you get when you turn on the television and you're watching any kind of something that someone else considers factual. It's somebody else's opinion of what happened.
Well, what's great too is about your work, and we're such in a divided world these days. There's these different tribal factions. There's nothing tribal about the works of Napoleon Hill. If somebody can find something tribal in here, I think they need to go see a doctor for some type of a mind checkup.
He doesn't care who you are. He doesn't even care if you're a criminal. He's telling you that if you change the way you think about yourself and you focus on what's important to you as a person, you can turn any failure into a success. And you can take your failures and turn them into lessons. That's the main thing. That people get all upset and they start slamming doors. Like, dude, sit down, write what happened, figure out what you need to do so that it doesn't happen again, and then do that. And he does it in such a compelling way that you can't help but want to try it. And that's the whole deal. Once you start to play with Napoleon Hill's words and you start to put them into your own life, it changes everything. 1972, think about that. That's a long time ago. My twins are 46 years old, so I know exactly what it is. If you can carry around a positive attitude for 46 years, you begin to develop it. Yeah, I also wrote the little gold book of Yes Attitude based on the fact that I wanted to put my own attitudinal thoughts into writing. And that book, it's 10 years old. I just came out with a new edition after the 10th. It's sold more than 300,000 copies in America. It'll sell 1 million copies. There's no doubt in my mind. Amazon will pair it with the Napoleon Hill book, and all of a sudden it'll make a bestseller list someplace. Totally crazy what Amazon can do.
Let me go back in time a little bit here, because as people hear some of the sales numbers, they're probably thinking, well, my gosh, Jeff must have the literary pedigree. He came from the finest schools, the best grades, and all that kind of stuff, right? That's exactly true, right?
I'm a product of my parents who were intelligent. So I was born with the gift of intelligence, and then I had to decide what I was going to do with it. Well, I sort of pissed it away at school. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I could have dropped out of any school, but I chose to drop out of Temple. And I traveled in Europe for 1 year at the age of 20. When I landed on the plane, I realized that I knew everything. I'm just going to go around and I'll be Mr. King Shit. When I actually got out of the plane and walked around some of the cities, I didn't know anything. I mean, I had no concept of history. I had no concept of what happened on the continent in the Second World War. Went to a concentration camp museum at Dachau, read the diary of Anne Frank on her doorstep, studied everybody that I possibly could from Vienna to Stockholm, and I got an idea of what I had to do. I had to learn something new every day. And you can't learn something unless you admit that you don't know it.
Did you go solo to Europe?
Yeah, I went by myself.
How important was the by yourself part of it?
It was all important. You don't go with when you're going to make a trip like that, that's your life's journey. From that trip, I got wanderlust. I was staying at a hotel in Paris, and the lady was a lovely, nice Jewish lady who took a liking to me and said, look, you can keep your bags here and take a train any place and then come back here and your bags will still be here. I'm like, cool. And so I used Paris as a sort of a jumping off point to travel around the continent. And I went everywhere. I mean, literally, I went to every major city on the continent, ended up falling in love with a girl in Berlin, ended up skiing in Switzerland for a while. I mean, it was all kinds of things happened. I got hit by a car in Copenhagen, and the guy that hit me took me to the hospital. All kinds of stuff happened. And by the way, they don't call it Danish pastry in Copenhagen because you're already in Denmark. They just call it pastry. The challenge that you have when you're on a trip like that is you wake up every morning and it's a new adventure. I'd never been to any of these places before. So every time I got to turn a brand new corner, and you meet somebody on the train. I took a German course in Berlin to learn how to speak German. One of the kids in my class, and this is 50 years ago, follows me on Instagram. Now think about that. It's mind-boggling.
Let me share something with you really quick. I don't recall his name off the top of my head. The founder of Fiji Water came from a wealthy family. His father told him, same kind of age, early 20s, he said, look, I'm going to give you a choice. I'll give you some money to start a business, or I'll give you money to travel the world. However, if you choose the money to travel the world, and I find out that you travel with anyone, the deal's off and you get nothing.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I think it's more difficult for a woman to travel alone these days, but not impossible. If you understand the rules, I have a 9-year-old daughter, even though I shouldn't, I do. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She's been to Paris 8 or 9 times. I've lost count. She will know how to travel by herself safely because I'm letting her now take little walks and, go places that she wouldn't dare. I have all of my granddaughters are older than my youngest daughter. So this summer, we took my 16-year-old granddaughter and they went out together for walks. They did it. When you're 9 and you can be semi alone in Paris without a parent, you're going to be okay. Knowing how to take the elevator, or knowing how to take the escalator, or knowing where you live and knowing the code for the front door, or how to use your metro ticket. That's the deal.
One of the ones that I want to let you elaborate on, I feel very attached to this. I run my life this way in many ways. Of course, look, I'm a capitalist. I like to make money. I like to have some success. I've got a little bit of ambition, all that kind of fun stuff. But the principle of service is ultimately the foundation of where I have found any success, because ultimately there's been so many people ahead of me that have given back to me, and I've kind of given back to them. And so I've just found that this notion, and Napoleon Hill probably outlines it better than my own thoughts, of course, but the principle of service, so key, isn't it?
It's totally key. There's a 5,000-year-old ancient Chinese proverb that says, to serve is to rule. And you bring it into the 21st century and you see all the companies that serve the best end up winning. You can say anything you want about Amazon, but their service rules. You can say anything you want about Nordstrom or Southwest Airlines, their service rules. They live by their service philosophy. I have taken that. I've taken it in a slightly different direction, Michael. Part of my philosophy is I give value first, which basically is a service principle. I'm looking to do something for the other person, and something in a way that becomes memorable and they are either grateful for it, or whether they acknowledge it or not. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. I perform one random act of kindness every day, no matter what. And I do that. The other person feels good, but I feel way better. People don't realize that service comes from your heart, not from your head. You don't have, not like an obligation to do it, although we have a kind of a disdain for it in this country. But when you serve, it comes from your heart, and that's the principle. What Hill is saying is you feel great when you serve other people, and literally it leads you to success, because even though that person may not pay you back, the world will pay you back because you are servant. That's the principle that you have to live by.
It does. It just makes you feel good, doesn't it?
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Even if it's just holding a door for an older person, or helping somebody up if they've fallen down, just something that makes you feel okay. It's amazing what it does. And I'm on a mission to do one a day, no matter what. Sometimes it's leaving a bigger tip. Sometimes it's opening up a car door. Whatever it is, it makes you feel good.
I don't recall ever, because I got the Little Red Book of Selling. That was the first book of yours that I've ever seen. I don't recall ever going, once I had the book, I didn't need a review. I made my own judgment and didn't really care what anyone said. I'm curious, though, for a guy like yourself who's so prolific, multiple books, millions of sales, and I'm sure if I went to Amazon, I guess I could find criticism there. I've never read it, so I don't know what people say. But I'm curious your general view on criticism as a whole. What do you even think of when you think of the word criticism? Is it even something that you even ponder at all? Or
I'll throw this at you. When the Eiffel Tower was built in the early 1900s, 300 prominent French people, the leaders of the country, wanted it torn down the day after the exposition was over, because they called it the ugliest building on the planet, the ugliest edifice on the planet. They didn't tear it down. People were still angry about it. Guy de Maupassant, who was one of the biggest critics, ate lunch at the Eiffel Tower every day for the rest of his life, because it was the only place that he could be in Paris and not see the Eiffel Tower. But in 1600, some Finland guy said, no statue was ever erected to a critic. But the people that they've criticized, many statues have gone up. And if you go to the Eiffel Tower, you'll see a statue of Gustav Eiffel that's absolutely gorgeous, but you will not see a statue of any of his critics. Think about it that way. Same with the guy that built the Brooklyn Bridge. Same, if you look at anybody, they'll criticize Elon Musk or they'll criticize Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs. Dude, those are the founding fathers of their respective business. They're going to march forward. They don't give a shit what anybody says about them. They get to wake up, and if somebody criticizes me, this is my philosophy about it. I get to wake up in the morning and be me. They have to wake up in the morning and be them. And I'm happy with who I am.
I'm looking at one of my notes here as you're talking, and I'm feeling it. And what I'm feeling inside this Napoleon Hill book that you've put together, ambition is a contagious thing. I'm already an ambitious guy, but I can literally feel you across the lines, and I can feel more ambition, and it feels contagious to me.
Attitude, enthusiasm, any kind of passion is contagious. You get it from the other person if you feel it from them. We will be inspired all day long based on this interview, maybe all week long.
I won't be able to sleep early, that's for sure. Hey, listen, you've got about a little over 20 years on me around, but I'm curious, for people that are listening right now, you've got more energy in your voice than most lethargic folks that I meet in their 20s. And look, there's plenty of folks in their 20s in Silicon Valley that are tearing it up. So I don't want to generalize there. But what have you done differently? What have you learned about the aging process and attitude that's different? Why are you not slowing down at all?
There's a real easy sentence that I can give you. I love what I do. And if you love what you do, if you're passionate about what you do, then every day is a great day. I don't have 2 days alike. I don't have 2 speeches alike. I don't have 2 books alike. The challenge that I have for myself is I don't have enough time in the day. I think sleeping is the biggest waste of time of my life. So I try to do it. And people say, well, you got to have 8 hours. I got to have 6 hours. I don't even want those if I can help it. But the challenge that I have is I have a passion for what I do, and I have an idea for what is next. What is next is the most important thing in life. Because if you live in the past or you dwell in the past, you're never going to get to the present or the future. You can learn from the past, but you can't live there. So I live in the moment, but I'm ready for tomorrow. And I'm ready in a way that my ideas are there, and my philosophy is there, and my strategies are there, and my connections are there. Just look at the friendship we built in an hour.
You meet people, and I'm sure you could say the same thing back to me, older people than you that you met along your career, and we all become older at some point in time. I mean, my gosh, I don't know how I got to be my age. It just happened like that. But, I just want to be inspired. Every person in my life, I just want to be inspired. And look, I'm old enough now to where I enjoy, if I can give inspiration to somebody who is hungry for it too, I will. And look, there's a friend of mine, and she's Vietnamese, and she has found a way to get herself down to grad school in Australia. And I was texting with her, listening to some of her story. And I actually sent her a few screenshots from this book. And she was just so excited to get the positive feedback. It was just, and so I love that kind of stuff, just like you do.
I will tell you that more than 20 years ago, I was at a networking event in Charlotte. I'm a huge wrestling fan, professional wrestling, the guys that sort of fake it.
Don't tell me you know Ric Flair.
I do know Ric Flair.
I hate you.
But somebody came up to me and said, hey, I know you're a wrestling fan. Nikita Koloff, the Russian nightmare, is here. Would you like to meet him? And I go, sure. And Nikita was a bad guy. He comes up and he's this, big hunk of a guy. Jeffrey Gitterman, he shakes my hand. He goes, oh, it's nice to meet you. And I looked at him. I said, I've hated your fucking guts for 10 years. He goes, well, I guess I was doing my job. We actually became friends. So friendly that he's now my house guest at least once a month for about a week because he lives out west and he travels back east. He stays with us. He's like my brother. I'm honored to have him as a friend because now he's a minister. He saved all his money. He's, financially independent, and he goes around and preaches and helps other people. One of the key principles of our life together as friends is our passage from the Bible that we both discovered from one another. I asked him one day, I said, what's your favorite passage? And he goes, well, it's from Matthew. It's O ye of little faith. And I took my Bible out and I showed it to him that I had it underlined. Those kind of things. And think about it, because Napoleon Hill writes about faith. I talk about how you believe in yourself. But, it was the boat ride where Jesus calmed the waters. It's just a phenomenal understanding of, dude, if you don't believe, you're going no place, whether it's religion or business or the business of religion. But the bottom line is, I developed a friendship with somebody because we felt we had a common bond. And then all of a sudden, literally 20 years later, we figured it out.
If we took the Little Red Book of Selling and did a separate hour-long episode of literally connecting the Little Red Book of Selling to professional wrestling and how they get so much of it right, my gosh, how much color could we add there for the last 30 years, huh?
Nikita and I wrote a book called Wrestling with Success. And he talks about his year-long battle with Ric Flair. I think he wrestled Ric Flair about 400 times in 1 year. But, the outcomes are predetermined. It's not fixed. The outcomes are predetermined. Those guys are ready. They are prepared. They are absolute specimens with 8% fat. It's unbelievable who they are and what they're capable of doing in a rink. And a lot of the guys have been to my home. A lot of the wrestlers, they're great guys. They're fun guys. I've just been really blessed in that I got to sort of meet my heroes. Because I used to take all my kids to the wrestling matches. It was funny as hell.
I remember watching probably in the late 70s, early 80s was when I first started watching. It was mostly Vince McMahon's stuff back then. So I didn't really come into contact with Flair until later on. But some of those old YouTube clips where you can go find Flair, where he's on fire, you find him on fire and you just say, my gosh, this is the most amazing performer. To watch him talk to the announcer, you can't stop watching.
Exactly. He was as prolific as anybody in terms of patter. He knew what to say and he knew how to say it. If you ever really watch deeply, Dusty Rhodes, the guy who was called the American Dream, he was the brains behind all of those storylines. Like who would beat up who and how that would evolve and who would get to the championship matches. And then Vince McMahon started his own thing.
Dusty had one of the worst wrestling bodies ever. He was really just...
Oh, yeah. I want to end with something, because the listeners to you are looking for something that they can take away and they can take back to their office or they can take back to their home and potentially turn it into money. In the book, literally it's on page 206, there's a quote. It begins with the chapter, the 5-point rule. Napoleon Hill says, "Success may be had by those who are willing to pay the price. And the price is eternal vigilance in the development of self-confidence, enthusiasm, working with a chief aim, performing more service than you are paid for, and concentration. With these qualities well developed, you will be sure to succeed." Now think about that. This is written 100 years ago, and there's not one word in there that has timed out. It'll be valid 100 years from now.
Not only are they not timed out, but every word is needed and there's not any extra that's not needed.
Exactly. There's no adverbs or adjectives in there that you can say, well, you could edit this out. I didn't want to edit anything in this book. I wanted people to see Napoleon Hill's real words. I took away some of parts of the lessons, but I did not edit one word of his in personal development or in positive attitude or even in selling. There was no reason for me to do it. I'm not, who the hell am I to take away somebody's word? Either fortunately or unfortunately, it was written in the mail, because in 1917, women were housewives, or they weren't in the working world the same way they are right now. So you have to interpret some of the things as men or women. But the bottom line is, this stuff is unbelievable. I would implore anybody just to go out and read the book twice. You can't read it once. Read the book twice, and it's life-changing.
I want to give a reason why I think people should check it out. Something that I love to do with Google is a lot of the out-of-print books, and I've gone back 100, 200, 300 years to look for investment books, right? And you've got in the rear of this, in the appendix, it says books you ought to read. These are Hill's original recommended readings from 1919. I'm not going to name them, but I haven't done this yet, but I have a sneaky suspicion that I can go on to Google's ancient books and probably find these. That alone, to go down the dusty trail of figuring out Hill's influences, is a really cool exercise.
Yeah, many of the books are available, many are not. I have them all, and I'm going to be taking my library and letting people subscribe to my library. I'm going to scan everything and put it into Kindle type of documentation. And for $10 a month, you can come into my library and peruse anything you want. You can't download it. You'll be able to read it, but you'll be able to make notes in it, and you'll be able to talk to other people about it. But all of these books will at some point be in my library that people can go in and become a member.
The book, The First Writings of Napoleon Hill, Truthful Living. What a great title, right? I should ask you before I let you go. I got to keep you for an extra minute. What does truthful living mean to you exactly?
What it means is that you are true to yourself, and that you honor yourself as a person, and that you go through your life waking up in the morning going, okay, I did it yesterday, I can do it today, and I'm going to do it tomorrow. You're telling yourself the truth so you can tell others the truth. It's how to live your life. It's not just how to make a sale, or it's how to be a better dad. It's how to be a better person. I have always stated that you can't be a great dad for other people until you're a great person for yourself. Then you have the opportunity to be a great dad. But life is not a sacrifice. Life is continual learning, and then you help, not sacrifice, or you serve, not sacrifice. That's the essence behind the title.
Jeffrey, I hope I can convince you to come on and chat with me as future books arrive in the next 30 to 40 years of your existence. I thoroughly enjoy chatting with you. You bring the power, you bring the energy, you wake me up. I'm going to go run around the block now or something.
Cool. What the hell time is it where you are?
It's only 8 o'clock. It's not bad.
Oh, it's not too bad.
No, it's not too bad. Where can we send people? Where's the best website? I know where it is, but where's the best place we can send people?
Amazon for my book, For Truthful Living. Go to Gitomer.com, GITOMER.com for anything else. Website's pretty complete now, and it's responsive. You can get it on your phone, you can get it on your tablet, you can get it on your laptop. There's a wealth of material there. When you buy Truthful Living, there's going to be an awful lot of other stuff about it. There'll be a Facebook group. There'll be all kinds of things. After the book launches, there'll be places where you can go and discuss it, because it will be discussable. I can promise you that. The Napoleon Hill Foundation has authorized and endorsed the book. I think there's a YouTube video up right now by Don Green endorsing the book. I'll be at the Frankfurt Book Fair in Frankfurt, Germany, talking about getting it done in other languages. I want this book in 40 languages in 1 year, and I'm going to make it happen.
I'm not betting against you.
No. It'll be in Vietnamese, by the way.
I've seen many of the motivational titles here. The biggest names I've seen have been probably Kiyosaki and Anthony Robbins. There's a ravenous appetite for these types of work, for sure.
As we were just talking about Nikita, he sends out a daily inspirational quote. For some reason today, it just came across my screen as we're ending. It says, "The secret to personal change is to know and face the truth." It can't be more realistic than that. I'm a full believer in, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said, because it will always come out exactly the same way again. It's very difficult in today's world to understand that that's the basis of communication. Because if you tell one mistruth, no one trusts you again, ever. Look at any politician. They're untrustworthy people, because they're all about self-aggrandizement and blame.
They're not needed for our personal success, our personal happiness. They're not relevant.
Exactly. Other than how much of our tax money we can keep.
That becomes an issue, but I don't know if we've got really much of a say in that really either. So.
No. But hey, it's a pleasure meeting you, pleasure getting to know you, and I certainly wish you every success in your endeavors. I will read, even though I'm not a trader, I will read Trend Commandments, because the title is freaking compelling.
Thank you, sir. I really like your ideas about working with Amazon. For a fellow author, that's very inspirational and very insightful, to say the least.
Cool. I'll hook you up with, and you can sort of take it from there.
Jeffrey, thank you for your time today.
Michael, it's a total pleasure. My people will call your people again, and we'll play again.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Take care, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.